This is Audible.
As You Wish, a Cinderella story and erotic romance, written by A. Violet End and narrated by Marasha Black. Forward. We are told that these stories start with once upon a time, but what if one discovers in her research that certain stories do not happen only once, but sometimes at least twice? In my study of all the Grimm's tales and other related folklore, I have learned that twice, or even thrice upon a time, true love's kiss has woken a princess. Twice, or thrice upon a time, the fell beast has turned to fair. What is one to make of this? I, for one, grow wary of the lie that true love doth only happen once, and only to the fairest among us, or that bravery and valiance only matter once, when in truth, don't such things matter always? But love is a mysterious thing. Honor perhaps even more so, for love can exist without honor, but honor almost never without love. If you have read my grim and dirty tales, then you may be surprised to hear Miss N speaking now about such things as love, honor, and bravery. The audiobook you are listening to now is no grim and dirty tale. It may be grim, and it is definitely dirty, but this is something altogether different, something you challenged me to write. I listened. I waved my magic wand. I look forward to hearing what you think. And so, I give you my first romance, As You Wish. Chapter 1. Once upon a time, there was a clever merchant. As all merchants do, he loved to trade, for he had a great love of money and a felicity for finding it. But, more than the love of money, he tenderly loved something else, his wife. In fact, the merchant made a daily practice of loving his wife, and before long, the couple had a daughter. The family became the man's greatest treasure, far and above any lust for rubies or gold. I did say he was clever, didn't I? Many happy years passed, but one day his wife grew ill and did not recover. When she felt that her end was nigh, she called their only child to her bedside. Although she was of marriageable age, the girl was quite innocent about the ways of the world. Beyond the family home, she only knew neighboring nobles, for rarely was she even taken to the peasantry street fairs. Instead, she spent her time at her mother's side, learning all she could about the lady's life and discussing what her own future should bring. The thought of a future without her mother was unfathomable. When her mother's time drew near, the girl threw herself face down upon her sickbed. "Oh, Mother, do not go! You mustn't! I cannot bear to live one day without you!" Her mother stroked her hair gently. "Always be a good girl, my darling Honora, and I will look down from heaven and watch over you." Soon thereafter, the frail woman shut her eyes and died. She was buried in the garden, as was the custom of the day. Honora went every day to the grave and wept, missing her mother the way only a well-loved child can. Her mother hardly ever scolded her, never ignored her, and rarely failed to console her. But now there was no consolation at all. Her father was grief-stricken, and although the kindly cook was free with her affections, she was often too busy to comfort Honora for long. Honora's graveside weeping became a habit, and eventually her father emerged from his own darkness enough to notice.
"What troubles you, my darling?"
he asked one day. "My heart has been pierced, Daddy," she said. "I feel as though all the love has drained out of it. I am happy for a bit. Then I remember Mama, and—"
"Away it goes, yes,"
her father replied softly. He was sullen for a moment, but then he brightened as though he were remembering something wonderful, and he cheered his daughter. "We must carry on and be kind, in Mother's memory, yes? She wouldn't want our lives to stop just because hers is over, little one." And so they both carried on as autumn turned to winter, and winter to spring. The snow fell and spread a beautiful white covering over the grave. But by the time the spring arrived to melt it again, her father had found a new family to be kind to. He had taken another wife. The new wife had 2 daughters of her own, and at first Honora rejoiced, for they were like enough to her to pass as her own blood. "Sisters, what a joy they shall be!" For a day she even forgot to visit the graveside, so taken was she with the girls. But in no time at all, before woe was upon the poor maiden, for the 2 stepsisters were fair in face, but foul of heart. On the night of their arrival, when any normal woman would have retired to her bedchamber to collapse from the ordeal of transitioning houses, the stepmother cast a sleeping pall over the servants, and enticed her husband to feast on her loins while the daughters watched with apparent glee. Honora was shocked. Before she could move to flee from her spot at the table, the witch-mother was dancing a spell about her father and beckoning, luring him away to their quarters, for deeds no young lady should like to imagine. The look in her father's eye as he pursued the witch-mother to bed told Honora that her father had no heart for escape. "Escape!" she whispered. "Escape!" one stepsister giggled. "Escape!" the other hissed, before they both dissolved into cackles. Honora ran to her room and shut the door. It had no lock. She had never need of one, so she pushed a short bookcase in front of it. She dove under the covers of her bed and sobbed until she could cry no more. Eventually, as the night wore on, and the servants awoke from their spell, she could hear them moving about the manor. Eventually, the house quieted for the evening, but Honora was quite sure that all could still hear the screams of ecstasy coming from her father, which never seemed to stop. I wish I could say that only happened once to our poor Honora, but the truth is that it never stopped. Soon her father was not leaving his room at all, but screaming in what sounded like pain for hours at a time. Honora prayed for deliverance as the smells of lust and sex filled every room of the chateau. It wasn't long before the witch-mother infected the servants, and they too turned one another into bellowing animals. Even as the cock crowed at daylight on the 4th day, the sounds of senseless rutting continued behind every door. The very walls seemed to quake and moan, and all were overcome by the passion. All but Honora. She'd awoken with a new resolve that morning, having finally collapsed into a deep sleep the night before. "He will come to his senses," Honora told herself as she dressed for the day. "He simply must." The girl felt her belly rumbling and went in search of breakfast. Instead of warm bread and honeyed milk on the table, she found her stepsister astride her father, the horrid girl cackling. Her father's eyes glazed over as though he were in another place altogether. Drool ran down his chin as the stepsister's breasts hovered over him, bouncing as she rode. She flicked her tongue at Honora, and it was quite like a snake's, forked and whispering of evil. Honora shut her eyes and screamed against the horror. She meant to run for it, but, opening her eyes, she saw the stepsister was no girl at all. Legs too long, hair too wild, claws and teeth where they ought not to be. Why, she is an evil spirit. A demon has taken my father. No sooner had she realized than into the kitchen snaked a wispy blur, the other sister, followed by the witch-mother. Their gleeful eyes promised Honora no good fortune, and, unsure how she could fight them, Honora fled the room. All is lost, all is lost. Where once there had been a loving and protective father, two unchecked demons and a witch now took turns with the Lord's cock. Honora had never felt so ill in her life. Father is lost. We're all done for. Behind her, the voice of a demon called. What does the good-for-nothing want from our kitchens? The other demon answered. Those who wish for bread should first earn it. Away with the maid! The witch-mother's laughter rang out in approval as her father moaned in painful release. As Honora ran, her fine clothes fell from her body, stripped as though rough, eager hands were shucking her bare. Horrified, she called for help, but no servants came to her aid. Reaching her room in utter nudity, she found the door locked. She pulled on the door, then took to kicking it, but it did not budge. "Come with me," she heard a deep voice say. Turning, she found a bantam man glaring at her, gesturing urgently. The shadow of a thick beard on an angular jaw gave Honora the impression that the man was quite grown, though he was diminutive. His bulging muscles strained against his simple sackcloth breeches, and she felt her nudity before him entirely. The shrieking of the demon sisters drew ever closer, and the bantam urged her on. Through streaming tears of fright, Honora stumbled into the arms of the little man, against whose hard body she found herself quite naked. He grasped her by the waist and stole her away through a concealed door. She was quite sure she'd never seen a door in that wall before. Where are we? Who are you? I know every crack and crevice of this house and every servant in it, but I don't know you. I don't know this place. It wasn't a room, exactly. What was it? He gave her a simple grey frock of sackcloth to wear, and a mumble for an answer. As she dressed in the dark, the little man lit a lamp. Golden light illuminated what smelled like an earthen chamber, and the girl blinked against the visual explosion of glitz. Gold and silver coins, coloured silks, jewels, and finery of all kinds draped every surface, piled high enough to disappear into shadow. The walls seemed to close in with the volume of it. My father is a wealthy man, but this is the trove of a king. Where are we? She whispered, her mind reeling. Are you another demon or some kind of angel? The little man laughed, lighting a pipe and taking a deep draw. He moved his finger, and she saw that he had used no match, but that his fingertip was aflame. I'm no demon, he said. He cleared his throat. I am but a humble fairy, dear lady." Behind his words, she heard music, as though his small harp played when he spoke. He blew out the fire. "I am neither angel nor devil, but something altogether separate. I watch over you because it pleases me, and that is all else you need to know today." "But what about my father?" she said. "What about your father? He seems quite taken with your mother." "She is not my mother. She's a witch. She's an evil witch, and she'll hurt my daddy. I just know it." The Bantam Fairy laughed. "Every young girl thinks her mother a witch. What has she done, pray tell? She's refused to buy you a lovely gown for a gift." Honora had been raised from birth to be a lady, but these insults were beyond the pale. She launched herself without a thought at the little man, and nearly succeeded in grasping him by the throat before he stopped her, pinning her arms to her sides. He hugged her tightly from behind and whispered into her ear as she sobbed in anger. "You still care for him when he has abandoned you?" the fairy asked. Gently, slowly, he released her arms and turned her to face him. Casting down her face into her hands, she shook her head. Yes. After a bit of sobbing, she raised her head and looked the ferryman in his wide, knowing eyes. So green. "I do care for him," she said. "He loved my mother, and he loved me so. It is only because of these evil women that he has lost his mind." The ferryman crossed to a chair and sat, propping his feet up on the table. "Very well, then," he said. "It seems I have chosen well." "Chosen? Chosen what?" "I have searched this kingdom far and wide to find the woman who has a heart for leadership. Someone loyal and kind, but unafraid to attack when necessary. Someone who knows when to retreat and when to attack. Someone must marry the prince. It befits my purposes to place a girl of my own choosing into the prince's bed. You may be that girl, young lady. You may be that girl." "But I don't want to rule a kingdom," Honora said. "I definitely am not looking for a bed, let alone a king's. I just want things the way they were. I wish my father was free of those women, for my mother to return from the dead." "Hush, girl," the ferryman said. He threw down his pipe and put his hands on his hips. He scowled, but through the loose sackcloth of his pants, Honora realized his manhood stirred. "You must not ask these things of me," he commanded. He mumbled something about a wish, about a dead, but Honora did not understand. She quaked at the harshness of his voice and the aggression of his stance, but she returned his stare, her hands on her own hips. "Steady, Honora. Stay steady." "Ask? What did I ask of you?" Before she could finish her question, he held a finger to his own lips, shushing her. "No." The music behind his words clanged like a poorly played piano. As they stared one another down, her eyes travelled up and down his body. This man, but he's not a man, is he? This fairy man. Why do I find him so appealing? Certainly he brought rescue from the demons, but how do I know I can trust him? Honora scoffed. Childish stories of fairies and princes and kings. As if. "Do I amuse you, milady?" the ferryman asked, his eyes narrowing. He no longer seemed angry. Was this the look her mother had told her about, not long before she died? Bedroom eyes. Honora felt herself unable to focus on anything beyond the man's crotch. Though he was small, whatever twitched and moved beneath the sackcloth did not appear to be minor. Sackcloth, such a contradiction! Honora looked around the chamber at the riches surrounding them. Surely he can afford splendid clothes. Why does he not dress the part of opulence? Deeper within, however, a louder voice screamed, directing her attention to the man's groin again, though she tried to look away. I wish I knew. Is he built like a normal man? He moved so quickly she barely realized before his arms enveloped her again. I can feel his muscles, his body, so hard. Everything is so hard. His musk filled her senses, and she felt her body relax as the spell of his nearness warmed her in waves of delightful suspense. His hair brushed against her cheek for a moment, and a tickling, fiery sensation radiated outward, multiplying at every point of her body he touched. Ask anything of me, but do not ask to bring back the dead, he whispered. I never, she murmured, so lost. His words made no sense. Her body awoke to lust in a way she had never felt. I am a good girl. I don't have feelings like this about strange men. As though he read her mind, he whispered in her ear again, his hands caressing her bottom through the sackcloth. You are a woman, but I wonder, have you ever enjoyed a man? She knew she should slap him and pray for divine protection as she ran, but there was fire raging within her. Between her legs, an unfamiliar feeling of wetness seemed to be her body's answer to this sudden heat. According to the law of the land, I am a woman. This is true, Honora whispered. Her voice sounded different, deeper, huskier. My mother told me I would someday enjoy the marriage bed, but I hadn't believed it. Not really. Do you believe you would enjoy it now? She did believe it, but was too afraid to say. You told me to take care of what I asked of you. You said something about a wish, a debt. What should I ask? Can you grant a wish, whatever it might be? The ferryman reached beneath the hem of her sackcloth dress and ran his rough hand up her leg, pausing at the thigh. She opened her knees to him, widening her stance without thinking, as he dipped his thick fingers inside of her, first one, then two, as she moaned in pleasure. What do you want? He whispered throatily, coaxing her backward as he guided her to lie upon a pile of silks. Whatever you like shall be yours, he breathed into her ear. He withdrew his fingers from her when she did not answer. All you ever need do is wish it, my sweet. No, touch me, she said, so quietly she thought for sure he could not hear. Just as she'd opened her eyes to see, his thick fingers were inside her again, and she rocked against his hand, grasping it with her own and guiding it harder and faster against her mound. So tight, he whispered. You are old enough to marry, girl. Are you not?" "I am," she said defiantly, "but I shan't." She struggled to free herself of him, or at least made a show of such a notion. "Not any prince, nor any king." The little man sat backward onto his knees and slowly unfastened his belt. Honora gasped at the sight of his manhood pointing right at her, pulsing for her, so red and angry. "Touch it," he murmured. She could smell him, musky and clean, a little spicy. She wanted to touch his cock, to taste him. She wanted to rub him, to suck him, to everything him. She reached for his prick, but at the last moment grew very afraid, and withdrew, throwing her arms over her face and shaking her head no as she fell backward into the silks again. What would Mother think? "Do you want me?" he said. She did, but said nothing. "Say you want me, lady, and I am yours," the ferryman said, pushing her knees apart with his own, his cock now inches away from her sex. "Anything you wish, my love. Ask. Ever it shall be yours." "I do want you," she whispered, though the sound of herself confessing to such a thing to a stranger she'd only just met filled her with terror and excitement, the likes of which she'd never imagined. "Are you sure?" he asked, rubbing his cock against her fuzzy nether region, right where they were wet and hot, right where she was throbbing. She thought she'd die if he didn't penetrate her immediately. "Though I am a virgin, I am sure I know what this is for," she said, and she grasped his cock and guided it into her. And then he was inside, cracking her open. "Oh!" she moaned in ecstasy. "Oh, my God! Oh, it hurts!" She felt like a juicy peach being split into two, and her lover moaned as though the ecstasy of sex might cut his very soul. He grasped her hips and thrust gently, holding himself from going deep as before. Better? She fairly lost herself in the depths of his longing and concern. She could tell he wanted to go deeper, and she felt herself pulling his hips into her, despite the pain. "Better," she said, feeling her body loosen to him. "Perhaps it's just tender." "Aye, girl," he said, "but the prince will be no virgin when you bed him. So consider this training, won't you?" He laughed, and his devilish smirk made him all the more sexy. If this were a spell, so be it. Honora was had. She reached for him, her hands seeking his flesh greedily beneath his shirt, her hips straining upward to have him, all of him, within her as soon as possible. She needn't say another word. The ferryman knew what to do, building his thrusts in strength and speed until she could bear it no more. "Will it go on?" she asked. "Shall you find release?" "As you wish," he grunted, leaning hard into her pelvis, thrusting his cock as deeply as he could within her clenching coos. She felt the ripple begin within her, spreading out from a single spot that seemed to inflame her pussy and roll out through each of her limbs like a wave of fire as he rocked the last few ounces into her. His seed filled her, burning so hot she thought it would scorch. She tried to catch her breath, but could not, for his hands were on her secret button now, stroking it first slowly, then faster, faster, into a decadent spin where there was no thought, no fear, no pain. She had found this pleasure spot herself, of course, but never had she done to it what he was doing now. She came for the first time at the hands of the ferryman, his magical seed spilling out from within her spasming pussy onto a pile of rare silks on the earthen floor of a hidden trove. So decadent, so raw. I must have more. Mother didn't tell me it would be like this, she said. He rose before her. I am at your service, girl, he said, and you are mine. Does this suit you, my lady? His? But you said the prince, he scoffed. You'll have your prince, my dear. His smile turned into a tight grimace. But you'll still be mine to use as I need. I have plans for you. Do not forget. He slipped back into his sackcloth pants. Our coupling, she began. I don't know how to ask. She bit her lip and wrapped a length of silk around herself for warmth, trying to find the words. I am incapable of lying to she whom I serve. He lit his pipe and reclined in his chair. Please, whatever it is, just ask. I feel rather silly, but my mother told me, that is to say, will I bear your children? Your mother. I trust you won't be talking too much of your mother in the prince's bed, else there'll never be an heir. He puffed his pipe. Let me guess. Your saintly mother instructed you to meet a nice young man who comes from money, set up a house with him, and have a few privileged brats, didn't she? No, lass. I expect she didn't prepare you for me. He smiled. Honora didn't know what to say. She reached for her dress, feeling foolish, feeling used. What was I thinking? Truly, he must be a demon like the sisters. I was under his spell, that is all. Only if you wish, he said, so softly that chills spread across her, beginning on the back of her neck and spreading down both of her arms in goosebumps. She instantly felt both powerful and afraid. That is to say, my dear, about the children. They'll only be born if you truly wish it. He laughed. What a question. He ran his fingers through his hair, then snapped his fingers, and a flagon of ale appeared. He had a long drink, then offered it to the girl. She'd seldom touched drink before, but helped herself to a swig. When shall I have my wish, then? Did I not just give it to ye? He chuckled as her face coloured. Depends on the wish, lass. I hope you don't mean the brats, or I'll have to find another girl. Prince Philip will have the idea, at least, that his bride is a virgin. She glared at him. Of course I don't mean I want your brats. I want to save my father, she said. Are you sure? He squinted at her as he blew a smoke ring at her head. I shan't rest until it happens, let alone bed a prince or rule a kingdom. The ferryman sighed. As you wish. I had hoped to save you from this place straight away. But if you insist... He smiled. But you don't mind a little hard work, do you?"
"Hard work? No," said the girl. "I quite like tending the chickens." Still, she wasn't sure that was what the ferryman had in mind.
"Good," said the ferryman. "The stepmother situation by itself could be handled quickly enough, but the demons are another issue entirely. I shall need your total cooperation. Do you understand?"
She nodded.
"Good. Return to your room, and no matter what, obey the instructions of your stepmother and sisters. When the time comes, I shall outfit you with all you need."
"Can't you not just defeat the demons and witch at once?" She twirled her finger through her hair absent-mindedly, stopping when she noticed the ferryman growing hard again.
"Would that I could, fairest,"
he said, shifting in his seat. He reached out and drew her near, and she lost her balance and her grip on the fabric. He pulled her down onto his lap nude. As he stroked her hair, she felt a sensation not unlike a warm summer rain. Where his hands touched, her tresses were now streaked with gold. As she wondered at the magic of it, he continued,
"Alas, I dare not challenge the witch and her minions until I have access to a potion the king holds ransom. Until then, I remain tethered. I may grant wishes and rely upon my wits, but demon fighting is a task for sorcerers and wizards. I shouldn't dare provoke either to help your cause, or mine, until I've had that potion."
Sounds quite complex. Honora couldn't help but frown. Her head swam.
"Death and politics always are, aren't they?"
said the ferryman, shrugging. She rose and wrapped herself as she moved toward the door. He lit his pipe and strode lazily to the bed as she watched. It seemed a good time to leave, but something held her back.
"You may stay the night, if you like,"
he said, seemingly reading her mind again. He fluffed the pillows and leaned back, his hands crossed behind his head, his pipe clenched firmly betwixt handsome teeth. "And if I go?" she asked quietly.
"You will wake in your own bed tomorrow, either way. What have you to lose by staying?"
"Only my honor, I suppose," she whispered. "Though that's already done, isn't it?"
"My dear,"
he said, more tenderly than she would have reckoned,
"if the house of your father has forsaken its honor, time will show from whence the tumble came. It is not on you, dear lady, not on you at all."
He patted the spot next to him.
"Rejoin me, my sweet."
She blushed. Something about the kindness in his words brought tears to her eyes, though she could not have said just why. "Nothing is right about what we have done, and yet nothing seems wrong about it either." She climbed into his bedding and curled up next to him, feeling the warmth of his body, the comfort of his skin so near.
"Tomorrow begins a new age for you, my pet. The witch has instructed the help to treat you as one of their own. You shall be put to work tending the fires and cleaning out ash. Demons love fireplaces, you know. They treat them as chamber pots."
He took a draw from his pipe and blew a smoke ring in the shape of a horrid horned creature.
"I suspect they will keep their eyes on you as they come and go from the manor. Do not be afraid. I shall never be far. When the time is right, we will make our next move."
She turned over and removed the pipe from the ferryman's mouth, slung a leg over his waist and straddled him, kissing him softly. He responded in kind, and then some, running his strong hands over her petite shoulders, warming her entire body with just a touch. "Aye, but I could use better padding than this if I'm to be ridden like your ladyship's pony, I think," he said. And Nora couldn't help but smile as he snapped his fingers and transformed the bedding into a lush green velvet pallet, covered with blankets trimmed in gold. She was just admiring the embroidered equine figures of the linens when the ferryman pulled her off balance, his hands on her shoulders and his hips thrust just enough to surprise her. The erection she spied as she looked down between her knees was no surprise either. "Might I taste it?" she said. "As you wish," he said, and as she kissed her way down to his rippling muscles, he added, "What flavor would you like it to be? Honey praline? Chocolate wine? Marshmallow? Or sweet plum, perhaps?" She moved her long hair away from her face, reached down and seized his manhood with both hands. He groaned. "I wanted to taste like you," she said. "No tricks." Before he could reply, she slipped the head of his member between her lips and licked. It was as warm to her lips as a scorching cup of tea poured fresh from the pot. It tasted of mint and chamomile, and she quite liked it, so she licked some more, first down one side of the shaft, then back up to the other. The ferryman reached down and steadied her hand on the shaft before he guided her into a rhythm. Up, down, up, down. Sucking the head of his cock while he helped her stroke the shaft sent a pleasant tingling sensation through her lips that spread throughout her mouth and face. How my pussy felt when he took me. "Climb on," he whispered. "I need to fuck you." His hands sought her urgently, threatening to pull her off balance again as he took purchase on her tits, her waist, her ass. "And what if I haven't had enough of a taste?" She winked at him, feeling wicked as she bent to fillet him once again. "I am your master, girl," he said, and wasted no time sitting up, flipping her about, and entering her from behind. Her legs spread apart. He grasped her at the bend of her leg where it met her hips and pushed harder still into her. It hurt divinely, and Honora lodged no complaint. Just when she thought she could take no more, he pushed her belly down on the bed, put her legs together as though he were through with her. She was just turning her head to see if something was wrong, when she felt herself crack apart as he pounded away at her impossibly tight pussy. She felt like a delicate curiosity wrapped tightly in velvet, hurtled violently to the floor to break ever so beautifully. Deeper and harder he went, until their moans met in melody and harmony. The friction of the velvet bed beneath Honora rubbed her throbbing clit as his thrusts increased in speed. She heard herself moaning as she came, just as the ferryman cried out for mercy and was granted release himself, the hot wash of his cum spraying out from her young gash, so abundant with nowhere to go. Chapter 2. They didn't speak again that night, for what was there to say? The morning held the promise of a new journey, but in the ferryman's den she took comfort. The ferryman massaged her skin, kneading her muscles and stroking her until she fell into a warm and cozy sleep. The first good sleep she had had since before her mother had taken ill. And then she was walking in tall crystal heels down a cobblestone path, the glowing moon enormous within a deep green night sky. "Honora," her mother's voice said, Honora turned round in search of her mother, and couldn't help but notice the white puffy gown spinning about her. A wedding gown. This must be a dream. Just because we dream of it doesn't mean it isn't real, her mother's voice replied. Then Honora placed her, dressed in pink from head to toe, a magical wand in hand. Honora's mother danced in golden shoes on the edge of a castle wall. "Mama, you'll fall!" "Oh, nonsense, girl," her mother said. "You needn't worry about me. I'm already dead." She laughed merrily. "But what am I to do, Mother? The ferryman—" And then Honora remembered what she had done, and was filled with shame. Her mother would know, and Honora didn't want to face her. "Do you care for him, darling?" her mother whispered. She floated down from the castle wall and approached Honora, extending her arms as if she would hold her like a child. Honora reached for her mother in turn, but found it impossible to connect. Reaching out for something in a dream was always that way, isn't it? Without great sadness, Honora woke in the cold bed of her new room in the servants' quarters. The cock crowed outside. She reached out for the bantam man, but, of course, he'd never been there at all. Just a dream. A rapping shattered her contemplation as a servant opened her door and crossed the room to her. "I'm here to rouse you, miss." Roughly her mother's age, though twice as wide and half as tall, the household cook had always been kind to Honora. The girl searched her eyes for signs of bewitchment. If the cook were under the same spell as the rest of the house, she could find no tell. "I see you're dressed for work," Cookie said. And so she was. Honora sat up to find herself clad in the ferryman's sackcloth dress. "That's just as well, miss. It won't be an easy life now, will it? Still, it beats the alternative." The cook laughed at her own joke. Honora wasn't sure whether to laugh or to cry. The cook drew in close. "They hear all we say, girl. They won't permit us to call you by your name, either. We're to call you Cinderella now, and you're to tend the fires. Supposing they want to see your beauty up in flames, I guess. Maybe your spirit. Don't give them a satisfaction. You mock me, miss." Cookie backed away, pulling a kerchief from her deep apron pockets. Reaching over, she pulled it down hard across Honora's face. Speaking loudly, as though she knew she had an audience, she said, "There ye be, Cinderella. Very nice. Looking well." And she whooped with laughter as she turned to retreat to the kitchen. Honora followed her, afraid of what this new life would mean, but knowing deep in her heart that truly dishes and tending fires would not be the worst of it. Chapter 3. And so her days were filled, for a time, rising early, tending to the fires, bringing water, helping with the kitchen tasks and the wash. The routine of it all became strangely comforting. Though Honora had never thought of herself as prideful, she now came to appreciate the work of the servants and the virtues of a job she could lose herself in, whether covered in ash, potato peelings, or soap bubbles. She quite enjoyed helping the laundress, who was a sweet girl her own age. Her name was Edith Rose, and Honora knew she was the cook's daughter. She'd never been allowed to play with her as a child, for fear of impropriety, but they'd always smiled at one another from across the courtyard. Now, as heaven would have it, Edith Rose became one of Honora's only friends. The same could not be said of the remainder of the servants, who seemed to move in and out of magic at the whim of the sisters and their witch mother.
Quite a few times, the men of the house moved upon Honora as she worked, catcalling, "Cinderella, Cinderella," as they stole their hands beneath her skirts to violate her. The women were equally as gruesome, and often more successful, moving in packs as they did. Always the glassy stare of the demon's spell lay on them, and though the girl dreaded their touch, she did not hate them for what they could not help. Life wasn't much easier when the servants were free from the pole. The shame of their own memories compelled them to ignore their rightful mistress, and during those times Honora laboured hard with no assistance in even the heaviest of tasks, while the demonesses hurled insults and the witch-mother laughed. "What's the matter, Cinderella?" the demon sisters taunted. "Going to tell Daddy on us?" They said his nickname like a dirty word, forcing Honora to shut her eyes tight and turn away before they made her see it again, made her watch their filthy couplings. So different was the home of her father then, as it housed the wicked beasts, that it might as well have become another address altogether. Honora endeavoured to recall the light of love she'd grown up in, the way life used to be when her mother kept the family home. She remembered her father strong and healthy, not screaming, vexed and oversexed behind locked doors. Sometimes she felt she would lose her sanity, so different was her memory from reality. Sometimes, when Honora was outdoors beating rugs or airing linens, a bird would perch above her mother's grave and sing a tune that sounded quite like, "Where has love gone? Where has love gone?" At night, she followed the sound of the bird to the castle walls of her dreamland, where she met her mother once again. She opened up to her mother to tell her how dreadful life was, but only the sound of the bird's song came out. "Where has love gone? Where has love gone?" "Father shall endure," Honora's mother reassured her, for, in the dream world, all questions and answers make sense, even those that flit forth from the lips of little Ash girls who used to be ladies. "You shall endure, my sweet. Take pity upon him. Loneliness is a terrible thing to bear, and 'twas not his doing that led to this state, but that of an evil spirit." The comfort of her dreams faded quickly, and often Honora sought the ferryman, though he grew cranky and tried to refuse her. "You said you would answer my wishes," she would remind him. "Come in, of course," he would say, and open his door wide, the polite manner of his phrasing not at all disguising the disgruntled emotion of the host. But first things first. Closing the door behind her, he would drop to his knees before her, lifting her skirts and tasting of her sweet flesh. "Lessons for the future queen," he would murmur into her dampness, nibbling her tenderly until her knees went weak and all was forgotten in the rioting darkness. If there were a better way to pass the time, Honora wasn't aware. Once she gave over her inhibitions to the ferryman and accepted him as a tutor in the ways of the flesh. She quite liked the lessons. "Grip me from the inside," he'd whisper, his cock stiff and filling her completely. Sometimes Honora struggled with what to say to such requests. "Speak, girl," I said. "Grip me tighter." You fill me completely," she would whisper. "Squeeze," he urged, and when she did, she was rewarded with his moans of pleasure. Like that, and then he would come, that hot, sweet honey on fire come spreading throughout her. All else aside, she wished it would never end, not ever. as you wish," he would grunt, and then the sweet torture would begin again, the ferryman flipping her over to work her swollen, whispering eye from behind, his gentle hand cupping her delicate mound, caressing it until she orgasmed, time and time again. As he grasped her hips, her hair, her shoulders, desperately scrambling atop her to thrust deeper and deeper, she felt a golden burn that melted into warmth, and all of it turned to gold. The golden handprints on her skin wore away, and though her hair shimmered ever more each time they met, she could see she was being transformed, but wondered, was it truly only for the bed of the future king? After such sessions, it was difficult to discuss her father.
"Why must you always bring it up?"
the ferryman would say.
"Can we not dally a bit longer and save Daddy for another day?"
He would gaze into her eyes and finger her hair, turning it golden with every touch.
"Do you not want to stay in my bed? Why should you concern yourself with an old man who is happily boffing his wife?"
"Because I must save him," she would whisper, struggling to keep her eyes open against the pull of sleep.
"Are you quite sure?"
asked the ferryman.
"After all, if he's as happy with his wife and daughters as you seem to be with me, would it not be unkind to take away 3 willing mouths, 3 willing women with such tight little pussies, pushing the old man's performance to epic levels? So what if 2 of them are his own girls?"
He smiled at her impishly. She sat up and struck him across the face. "That's my father you're speaking about, and I am his daughter, not those demons." She stood up and wrapped a measure of silk around her. "You said you would help me, but so far all you've done is fuck me. I'd be better off just leaving the manor on my own and buying an assassin's oath." She fled the bed and was halfway into the hallway, where the lonely stable boy waited. As he lurched toward her, the thrall of the witch-mother's sex spell upon him. His sore and overused pecker hung raw from his breeches like a length of new sausage. She couldn't help but shriek in disgust. This was not at all what she expected. "Fancy a blow, miss," he said, though he winced as he reached for his member. Ready for a taste, are ye?" He let his trousers fall to his knees and pointed to his cock.
Suck it, Cindy,"
he said, advancing on her awkwardly, cupping his tackle with both hands while his erection stirred. "If your man-bone had a voice, it would scream for help," Honora said. "Cover it up and get some help, stable boy." But it was too late. The boy pulled on her silks with greedy hands, his eyes glazed over with meaningless desperation. Honora turned to retreat into her lover's chamber, but she was blinded by too much light. She closed her eyes, and, as she did so, she heard and felt something heavy hit the floor beside her. A rough hand grasped her own and drew her close. I would know his smell anywhere. Safe in the bantam's strong arms, she looked into his green eyes.
"No one will ever touch you against your will as long as I live," he said. "Not even the prince himself."
He looked past her at the body of the stable boy, splayed on the floor of the hallway. She turned to look as well. "The poor thing," she said. "He used to be a good boy. Can he not be saved?" The bantam aimed a wand at the stable boy's form and raised it into the air, lifeless.
"No one who touches you in lust shall live, no matter whose will it was."
His voice was cruel, and Honora knew it was unfair, but
she knew she had no voice in this decision. The body rose from the ground and bathed in white light, until the light permeated his form completely and disappeared into thin air. It might not have been fair, but it had been so long since anyone had watched out for her. She couldn't help but feel her affection grow for the ferryman. She knelt before him and took his hand between both of hers. "I beg of you, help me save my father and all his household from this scourge. No more should have to die. I will do what you ask, but please let us do it, my love." He grinned and patted her hand.
"Am I your love, then?" he asked. "It is not just the doing it you care for."
"That's not what I meant," she said.
"Answer the question."
"You know how I feel," she whispered. He led her by the hand back to his apartment and guided her onto his lap.
"You shall marry the prince at my command. You do realize this, yes?"
He stroked her hair away from her cheek, tucking it behind her ear.
"It is part of the deal."
She paused. "As you wish." Chapter 4. That night, tucked into her lover's arms, she walked hand in hand in dreamland again with her mother. I know I should be ashamed that you and father should cast me out for my behavior, but I am bound to him, Mother. I feel it in my heart." Her mother waved a magic wand with a star on the end, and glittering baby stars flew in showers all about the girl. "Hush, darling," her mother said. "You're a good girl. You've always been a good person, Honora. Sometimes the heart possesses wisdom deeper than law. Is there honor within this man?" I want there to be," Honora said. "Want and need often cloud our view of what must be done," the dream mother said, leading her to the castle stairs. A fountain gushed before them, awash in gold and silver sparkles. The dream mother shook her wand again, and the sparkles turned to golden stars that alighted into the night sky. Pointing with the wand, she drew Honora's eye to the heavens. "Where you are bound by honor, my daughter, service is always a choice," the dream mother said. "Where you are bound by love, service is never a chore." Honora tried to speak, but the dream mother squeezed her hand and smiled so placidly, so earnestly. All at once, Honora's waking mind fought to be heard. This was her mother, her own darling mother. "Oh, wake and be near her. Hold on tight. Do not ever let her go." Mute and paralyzed, Honora fought to remain in the quickly fading dream. "You must name a thing if you will love it," the dream mother said. She felt her mother squeeze her hands, and she tried to squeeze back, but it was too late. Mother's voice hung on the edge of dreamland like a bird interrupted mid-song. Honora awoke in her own cold bed, wishing for the ferryman's warmth, and wondering what the dream had meant. Mother's words were cryptic, but true. She didn't even know her lover's name. "Oh, Mother," she whispered, crying into her pillow, pitying herself in a most unflattering light. Chapter 5. Soon thereafter, the king held a feast, and his royal highness decreed that each lass who was old enough to marry would attend. Whether or not he would choose one of them for his son remained to be seen, for neighboring royals were known to have princesses as well, though
Some of them were yet too young to be eligible.
No promises, eh? The people reminded one another. But all across the land, lords and ladies outfitted their daughters for the king's inspection, hastening to reveal whatever finery they could amass in short order. Few spoke of the dark time in the king's past, when maidens were invited to court as targets for seduction. But there it was well known that the king kept a fountain in the castle's most private chambers. A well-muscled male figure spraying water from an enormous erect penis onto the bust of an open-mouthed, adoring maiden. It was said that the proliferation of lords in the land was a result of the king's predilection for spanking young virgins and sending them home to their fat daddies with bruised bottoms, honorary titles sealed with the king's signet tucked into their bosoms. Still, he was the king, and all of that vulgar maiden play was in the past, as far as Honora or anyone else knew. Every self-respecting young woman in the land would be in attendance, guarding her virtue and seeking an audience with his son, Prince Philip. The king was old, and Philip was said to be kind. Well, at least there were no stories circling about him. Still, our Honora dreaded the ball. When the invitation arrived in her name, and the demon sisters snatched it away, she felt a sense of false relief. The ferryman would send her, she knew. And father, remember him, Honora. How else shall you save him if you defy the ferryman's wishes? On the day of the ball, Honora was tending to the fires when the demon sisters called her up to their room.
Now, comb our hair, brush our shoes, and tie our sashes, for we are going to dance at the king's feast.
Perhaps they meant to torture her with the exclusion, but she smiled as she met their requests. She brushed out their long locks, cleaned their teeth with floss, and though they flicked their forked tongues at her and snarled with their sulphur breath, she reminded herself that all of this would soon be over.
"Rub me down with oil,"
one sister ordered her, lying on the girls' shared bed with her legs spread wide.
"I wish to be ready for Prince Philip in every way."
Honora knelt before the first sister. The girl's snatch was smooth as a newborn baby's.
"This is the clitoris,"
the demon said, pointing to her rigid nub.
"A girl like you sucks it hard until a girl like me has had enough. Do you understand?"
Honora bit her lip. She could call on the ferryman and invoke her wish to save her from this indignity. But would he hear? Would it be a good idea to reveal the alliance, or even his presence in the house, which seemed to have gone unnoticed thus far, so close to the pivotal moment in their plan?
"That's wiped the smile off your face for sure,"
said the stepsister through a nasty smirk as she rubbed herself.
"Now, get to giving me mine."
Time passed too slowly as Honora did the demon's bidding, and the girl's wretched body, though beautiful and supple, tasted of poison. For father! For father! The demon's breathing increased, rapidly, her hot breath filling the room.
"Faster! Don't stop, you tawdry wench!"
"She won't stop. She likes it too much," the other sister chimed in. "I say, which of us the prince ain't having gets to start on her as a consolation prize? What do you say?"
The witch mother entered the room just then.
"Oh, girls," she said, "of course the prince will have you both. There will be better spoils to us all than this worthless slag in sackcloth, don't you know? Honestly, you beasts of hell are severely lacking in imagination. We shall have a harem of princesses to fist-fuck if we wish, and we'll feast on their bones if we please."
Oh! That was just the sort of talk that sent the demon sister over the edge, And at last Honora was relieved of her duty, as the trio soon thereafter departed for the ball. Chapter 6. Exhausted, Honora made her way to her father's chamber. The house will be still for a night. Finally, they will leave my poor father be. I must see to him. She was surprised to find his chamber door unbolted, but as she pushed it open, it was the ferryman's chamber she found. Simultaneously excited to see him, and crestfallen for not having the chance to check on her father, she entered the trove in a foul mood. He drew her into the room and swirled her about in a waltz. "Not funny," she said.
"Are you not ready to dance, then, my love?"
He pulled her close and ran his fingers through her hair as though he was sculpting her from clay.
"You must go. You knew I would require it of you."
"I must do no such thing," she said, "except have a drink of your fire whiskey to wash away the flavor of hell."
"Kneel, then,"
he said. As disgusted as she was with the interaction with her sisters, and as disappointed as she was at not seeing her father, she forgot it all when the bantam commanded her. She felt herself grow wet again in the hot center of her sex, the thought of supplicating before her master enough to ready her in an instant. "I don't need any prince," she said. "I have you."
"Open your mouth,"
he said. She waited. Would he violate her the way the sisters had? Was he trying to show her what she would expect from the randy king's court?
"Close your eyes," he commanded. "Remember why you came here."
She thought about her father, imagined him well and hearty, free of the witch-mother and her minions. I will do anything to save my father," she said.
"And when you service me, is it out of love for him, or for yourself?" he whispered.
"Where I am bound by love, service is never a chore," she said. She couldn't remember exactly where she had heard that said, but it felt like the right thing to say. Seldom in our day-to-day lives do we feel we are saying the right thing, dear reader. Am I right? Sometimes the right words don't come from our minds at all, but from our hearts, or our guts, or even our dicks. We all know this is true. Whatever organ it was that spoke on her behalf, Honora followed its lead.
"Open your eyes," the bantam said, "and you can shut your mouth. We must do something about that breath before you leave for the castle."
A rainbow of jewels glittered before her, raining down like a waterfall from on high.
"What's your favorite color?"
the little man asked quietly. She faced him and peered deep into his green eyes. "Emerald, I think," she said, but scarcely were the words from her lips than he was upon her. Her clothes fell away at his touch, as they always seemed to do, and he was hard and nude and warm, his familiar fuzzy chest and legs greeting her silky smooth body once again. "I thought I had demon's breath," she giggled.
"Curse it," he said. "This will be our last night together. I will have you, lass, breath or no breath."
Then he snapped his fingers, and her mouth was filled with the flavor of violets and peppermint, of fresh green clover, and the hot honey flavor of him who she loved, who she must soon relinquish. She felt the tears course down across her cheeks. He grasped her by the hips and lifted her, sitting back on his haunches on the bed. Slowly he lowered her onto his shaft, lancing her snugly, delightfully, so achingly fine.
"Oh, I love it when you do this to me," she whispered, and then threw her head backward, moaning as her tits thrust outward, begging for him to reach out and scratch with the stubble of his chin. He wrapped one arm around her back and cupped her bottom with the other as she rose to match his rhythm. "This, my love. Thrust. This, my love. Thrust. Never stop, never stop." She was just about to come when he pulled her off him and thrust his cock against her clit hard, harder, rubbing and shuddering, wrapping his arms around her waist to steady her as they both came, a thick spray of golden honey shooting from his cock and coating her all the way from her pretty chin to her lustrous mons. "You knew the rules," he said, panting. He fell backward onto the mattress and snapped his fingers. A soft towel flew onto the bed, gliding to a landing like a fine Easter crane. She patted herself clean, although the ferryman's spunk never made her feel dirty. "I know. I took the deal, and I will take you to the inner circle of this Prince Philip, if it means saving my father from the witch. But I shall not want him, my love. I cannot want him. I shall only want you, little man." He crossed the room and poured straight fire whiskey from a small cloudy bottle into a pewter goblet. A cruel laugh escaped his lips before the cup made its way to his mouth.
"You may serve me, but how could you ever love a man like me? You don't even know my name."
"And you never call me by my own either," the girl said. "How are we to get anywhere if we do not know these simple things about one another?" The little man started to answer, but the girl shushed him, taking his glass of whiskey and downing it as she put a finger to his kiss-bruised lips. The whiskey tasted like his love-making felt, hot, wet, and delicious. Fire spread through her now, from her loins and from her mouth. Her heart beat hard in her chest. The ferryman began to speak again, but she cut him off. "No, shh. I know all I need to know about you, love. You've taught me everything, shown me everything. You've protected me and given me hope when I thought my heart had gone to the grave with my mother. I shall love no one but you, and so I swear it, or my name not be Honora."
"I know your name, Honora," he bellowed. "Honora, Honora, Honora! And would you have me call you my sweet Honora, and give up this plan, and I should relinquish pursuit of the potion, Honora? Is that what you wish, dearest?"
The look in his eye grew fierce, and for a moment she was quite afraid. He slammed the whiskey cup down and refilled it. He drank it quickly, golden-brown rivulets of liquid fire dripping from the edges of the glass and mingling with hot tears as they gathered on his jawline. She reached for him, aching to comfort him. He pushed her hand away.
"No, Honora, Honora, I knew your name, Honora. How many years do you think I haunted this house? Haunted every house where a noble woman gave birth to a lady I might use as a pawn for my own goals. I know your name, Honora."
He spat it at her now like a curse, his eyes narrowed into cruel slits.
"Names have power, Honora. Do you feel yourself shrinking, even as I say your own?"
And it was the girl's turn to cry now, as her lover grew demented and mean before her eyes. Had she made a mistake, trusting him, loving him? It had come so naturally, start to finish, and she wasn't ready for this to be the finish.
She knew not what to do, what to say. "Tell me your name," she said. "If you must turn cruel, I would know who it was that truly broke my woman's heart." And she fought back tears, even as he scoffed. He stood and wrapped himself in a silken cloth, tying it like a kilt. Even through his furor, she could not help but admire his petite body, and she felt no shame as her eyes made their way up his trunk, to his thick, soft lips, to the mouth that had given her so much pleasure, the mouth whose words now destroyed the dreams she hadn't known she'd had.
"Broken hearts. You are a fine one to speak of broken hearts. My father told a beauty his name once." "Oh, only tell me your name, and do not worry, for I will stay forever and spin your straw to gold," she said. "We have a child," she said. But once she knew the name Rumpelstiltskin, she left us and was gone.
Honora was almost too confused to speak. Your father was—"
He nodded. "Rumpelstiltskin." "Yeah."
He laughed sardonically. "The man who trapped that poor girl into giving away her baby! That was your father!" The little ferryman had another drink and slammed the cup down.
"Yes, but that's not exactly how it went, my sweet Honora. Do you believe every fairy tale you've ever heard?"
Honora didn't know what to say. The bantam continued.
"My mother was just a sleeping beauty when my father saved her from the jealous spell of a witch. She was no princess, no noble woman, just a pretty girl, the daughter of a baker well known for her looks. Beauty was the one who asked about the gold-spinning trick," he explained. "She was the one who wanted to climb the social tower and sit atop the lap of the king. Father knew better than to tell her his name, but he thought she'd grown to love him, especially after I was born."
He smirked.
"He didn't think she'd want to run. She swore she loved us. What a fool! Beauty left us anyway. Beauty always leaves."
Honora felt the wall going up between them. She knew he must be doing this on purpose, telling her this story, insinuating that she was like this beauty woman, that she would forget him and love the prince, love the wealth and the power of her new position. "There's nothing you can do to drive me away," she said. "I love you."
What a fool he was! I always thought that. What a fool! He should have left well enough alone. Let her call him a nickname. Make her stay and raise me.
"I love you. Do you hear me?" she said, rushing to him, grabbing him by the shoulders. "I love you."
"Charming,"
he whispered, turning his back and dropping his face into his hands.
"My name is Charming."
Chapter 7. His back still to her, he'd buried his face in the palms of his hands. "Charming," she said, the name still foreign on her lips. "Look at me. I insist. Charming." She couldn't help but smile at the sound of his name, though the distance he was imposing between the two of them filled her heart with panic. He did not answer, but instead snapped his fingers. Honora felt magic building in the air, but more than that, she could feel the wall between them thickening. She reached for him, but a cold breeze wove through her fingers instead, and then the breeze was cool and solid, until she realized it was a stream of silk.
Layers and layers of silk flew through her hands and balled themselves into her arms. What? She opened her mouth to question her lover, and felt something heavy and foreign upon her tongue. Spitting, she found a mixture of pearls and deepest emeralds sparkling down her front, cascading into a pile of silks and taffetas. All about her, every treasure of the known world was weaving itself into assorted luxury textiles, draping and ruffling and fluffing themselves about into a gown the likes of which she'd never seen. The jewels rose up like a collar, fastening themselves about her neck, and she raised her hand to them in shock. They were warm to the touch, like a hot mug of broth. Emerald, she knew, like her lover's eyes. "Darling, what is this? Oh, but do speak to me, Charming." She saw him flinch as she said his name. She didn't like that, didn't want to harm him. "What is it you wish of me?" she asked quietly. The little man snorted, turning to face her. Finally, he seemed suddenly weary, the vitality she'd known but moments ago now drained from his visage. He drew himself into a formal stance as he addressed her, a look of dispassionate stoicism, masking what she knew must be a form of hurt.
"My lady Honora, I remind you that it is not only my wish that shall be fulfilled, but yours as well. You wish to free your father, and in order to do that, I shall carry forth with my plan to become the most powerful wizard in the land. You shall attend the prince's ball. You shall win his love, and you shall enter his court as his intended queen. Once you are within his inner circle, you shall grant me entry into the castle's most hidden chambers. There, I shall find the king's own magician, and wrest from him the potion of all power."
He turned to the bottle of fire whiskey and poured another drink.
"That is what I wish."
"The potion of all power?" Honora asked. "This is the potion held ransom?"
"Ah, you remember that story," he said.
"I remember you said a potion was held ransom, and that I must help you save it, in order for you to help my father. That was before
I was in love with you. Yes."
A grim little laugh escaped his lips as he had another drink of whiskey. "And you might help me now, mightn't you, Charming? Without the ransom, if I wished it, you might help me out of love?" Charming's spell pulsed all around the girl, the layers of material dressing her now, the jewels tightening against her throat like a choker. She felt their hot weight against her chest, her wrists, her ears, felt them braided into her hair.
"Do not wish it,"
Charming sighed. Then, with angry tears, he shouted,
"My own father is hostage. Only the potion of all power can solve this riddle. Do not ask me to abandon my task."
She took him into her arms, though he refused to make eye contact, and his warm body was stiff as a board, repellent to her touch. "We will prevail, darling." She leaned back a bit and held his face in her hands. "Would wishing it make it so? Is that within your power, Charming? To just wish this away? Say the word, my love, and I'll wish it. I know not how magic works, but, my love, I cannot hope to love another." Charming sneered.
"Prince Philip is a shrewd man, but a romantic at heart. He's been offered the hand of every princess from here to the far east, but He insists on holding out for true love.
He eyed Honora's mouth, though he barely met her eyes. She felt her lips tingling, as though the bantam had kissed her.
If you wish for anything, wish yourself to fall in love with him.
She could hear the pain in his voice as he turned away once more. I don't want to love anyone but you. I just want to save my father and return here to you,
Do not say it!
Honora's tears came, then, hot and unceasing, dripping down her cheeks faster than she could wipe away. They streamed so hard and fast that they formed a puddle at her feet. She didn't care, though. The moment she was dreading had arrived, and she had no choice but to follow through. She would save her father. She would give her heart to the prince. Somehow. Must Charming break her heart now, so that she can fall for another? Of course. She understood finally. There was no other way. Why must it all be so unfair?
Love is its own cruel magic, he said. Blessing for some, curse for others. Magic wouldn't be magic if we knew why it worked.
The little man clapped his hands, and she felt her feet warming. Beneath the many layers of skirts, she saw the high-heeled slippers, fine as winter's frost on glass, but hard as crystal. Made of my own tears, she said. Love is a cruel magic indeed. She slipped them on, surprised by their heat. And then he surprised her again, his voice pouring forth gently in dulcet tones that Honora felt in her core of her being, like the smell of home or the sight of sunrise over the courtyard in the manor, tears welling in his own eyes as he sang.
Once upon a time you were surely mine, and I shall love you, darling, until the heavens no longer shine. I send you to him, my darling. But with every step you take, remember, once upon a time, you were mine.
Honora wiped the tears away from her cheeks. If you're trying to give me courage, it's not helping, she said. I only want to stay and love you more. He continued as though she hadn't spoken, though his voice was softer now. Only when you remove the shoes will you truly be able to give yourself to Philip. When that happens, you shall be his to keep, despite whatever we have sworn to one another in the throes of passion. The magic of your tears and my will make it so sweet, girl. You shall remain my servant, but once the potion of all power is mine, less and less shall I need you. She started to ask a question, but he cut her off. And I shall never share you, my love. He must have seen how crestfallen she felt, for he added, Indeed, your father will be free, and Philip is a good man. So take heart. You shall rule beside him to a great success. A kind woman, well suited to the job, as you are. And then, all too quickly, his voice was growing cold and friendly, and he shrunk into darkness before her eyes, sounding as though he were whispering across a great distance as he instructed her this last.
"Call on me again when you have the potion. And not until then, if you please."
The little man in his treasure trove faded, and she swept into gloves she hadn't even noticed she was wearing, as a dark mist overwhelmed her.
"Goodbye, my beauty,"
she thought she heard him whisper through the darkness. "My love," she wept. But there was no answer. Chapter 8. Love is its own cruel magic. Beauty always leaves. The words echoed in her mind. A cool breeze dried her tears, and she took a deep breath. She felt lighter, despite her grief at parting. She opened her mouth to shout at Charming, whether he would hear her or not. "Your spells are unkind, ferryman," she tried to say, but the words came out tinkling of bells and thrumming like harp strings, same as the music when Charming spoke. He has bewitched me, then. The better to win the prince, I suppose. When she dried her eyes again, she was outside the castle. Prince Philip's banners waved prominently above her. Everywhere she looked, the king's men were staring back. Well, of course they were staring. How often does a pretty maid materialize in the castle courtyard? And with no escort at that. She looked around, hoping to spot a familiar face to walk in with, but no one was outside the castle, save for servants and peasants. She could hear the music from the ball, and, despite herself, the gaiety moved her. She swirled once, her petticoats and ruffles flying out about her. Then, helpless in the thrall of sheer beauty, she lifted her pretty arms to the sky in joy. Her hands went to her hair, and once she was sure the chignon Charming had styled for her was still in place, she felt the jewels about her person one last time for luck. A fountain gushed nearby, surrounded by still, opulent pools. She rushed to the edge of the nearest gazing pool. A tiny frog crawled out and said something lewd to her, but she paid it no mind. Instead, she peered into the water. "My," she said, "I would not know myself at all." Courage rose within her, and she threw her shoulders back. When battling demons, it's always better to have the element of surprise, she told herself. She'd never battled a demon before, but she was sure it was true. The swishing of petticoats and laughter met the reverberation of strings in the great hall, and a joyous cacophony swelled as Honora approached the ball. Flutes picked out a delicate tune, and fine young women and men bowed and curtsied before the king. Honora had met a few of them as girls, and even some of the young lords, but had not been round to visit anyone since her father had remarried. Would anyone recognize her? She looked down at her bosom. She had truly blossomed into her own womanhood since Charming had taken her into his bed. Her looks had changed in every way, and not at all. She still had the same sweet face, but her breasts had grown heavy, her hips round, her behind blossomed into the fullness of its womanly nature. No, she realized, it is not likely anyone should recognize me at all. She hurried into the chamber, the crystal slippers burning her feet with every step. Past the dancers and the instruments the crowd parted. Honora gasped, but she wasn't the only one. All eyes were on a platform before the throne. To
two familiar figures danced with one another. The demon sisters, as their mother the witch strummed a harp and sang. One little dance for the master, one little dance for the king, one little show for the courtiers, one little song left to sing. The sisters ran their hands across each other's chests and arms, shimmying as their tight skirts and voluminous bustles trailed sinuously behind them. They circled one another, two savvy predators acting out the hunt. One little kiss for the parting, one little gift for the day, one little dream is outstanding, oh, what a queer little day. And, upon hearing the word queer, the sisters unlaced one another's gowns slowly in a choreographed tease. They twirled as their mother sang with them, the tempo picking up and the royal orchestra joining in. Even the crowd around the dancers seemed compelled to clap in time as the demon lady shed ever more clothing in front of the enraptured prince. One little lick for the tasting, one little fuck, oh, so tight. One little pleasure you're asking, just nod if you want us tonight. The sisters bent forward, their ample bosoms looming large before the eyes of the clapping crowd, their nude bottoms displayed for the prince, who now stepped forward, his hand on his crotch, his arousal impossible to ignore. Still, the witch sang on. One ample gift from his highness, two modest girls wish to share, night after night of highest pleasure. Take my daughters, your highness, the pair! The sisters set upon one another, mouth to mouth, fingers and hands greedily pleasuring one another, until they seemed a new breed of beast, a tangle of heaving breasts and glistening sex, ecstatic demon screams filling the room as they took turns with one another's hot, hungry lips. The prince looked as though he were about to pull off his own clothing and join them. "Stop!" Honora cried. The spell broke, and everyone turned to her. The witch-mother glared, but if she recognized Honora, it was impossible to tell. No one spoke. Scarcely anyone seemed capable, recovering from the after-images of such a performance. What to do? What to do? Honora's shoes burning hotter than ever. Quickly, she kicked one off, reached down and tucked it into her petticoats. My shoe, she said. Oh, do help me find my crystal slipper. I seem to have lost it. It was all she could think to do. So bizarre was her request that it broke up what was left of the mood. Many of the courtesans turned away from the demon sisters altogether. What size was it? One helpful lady asked. What colour? Said a gentleman. Oh, crystal. A crystal slipper, of course, said a lovely girl Honora had once met at a joust. The chattering grew as the crowd stooped to their knees and began peering about the ballroom in search of the missing shoe. Such is the power of embarrassment, dear reader. I do not recommend you employ it often, though, lest you find your party invitations ever on the decrease. The girl felt the eyes of the witch and demons upon her. Turning back to face them, she knew she was defenseless, save to call upon Charming himself. How could she defend against wicked spirits? As her mind reeled, she pretended to search for the slipper, but was interrupted by a hand on the small of her back. "Gentle lady," she heard a familiar voice say, "may I be of assistance?" She rose and looked into the eyes of Prince Philip, the man her lover intended her to marry. Certainly I could not love him. Could I? Her remaining slipper pulsed its warmth into the sole of her foot. The other was quite cold against her skin, tucked away in a garter. Honora smiled for a moment before flitting her eyelashes prettily at the valiant prince. "Your Highness," she said, curtsying.
He bowed in return. At least he's a gentleman. What am I saying? He's a prince, of course. Forgive me, kind sir, but I seem to have misplaced my other crystal slipper. She lifted the hem of her dress daintily, just enough to point her pretty toes. Her toenails sparkled, and once again she heard the music in her voice from the ferryman's spell. Prince Philip laughed, a look of true surprise on his face. He took her by the shoulders and looked into her eye quite earnestly. "I say, are you a fairy princess, then?" he asked. She didn't know what to say. She opened her mouth, but should she tell him about the ferryman? It seemed unwise. The prince burst into laughter. "Crystal slippers and twinkling toes!" He threw his head back and guffawed. So obvious was his relish at their meeting, Honora forgot to be terrified of the witch mother and the demon sisters, just for the moment. With a laugh like that, perhaps there could be at least a friendship, if this is what Charming wants. Me? A fairy princess? Oh, heavens, no, she said, shrugging one shoulder demurely and hiding her colouring face for a moment. Why was she blushing? Was this part of Charming's spell as well, or was she genuinely flushed to have the attention of the future king? I could get used to flirting with such a good-looking man, I suppose. The thought was fleeting, though. The sisters loomed in the background, and the witch mother waved her arms overhead in sinister loops, amassing power. Swirls of evil brewed around her, creeping onto the air like drops of violet and cerulean dye in an otherwise clear pool. And Nora watched in horror as one by one the courtesans turned to the sisters, transfixed. The demons danced, each clad in an airy gown of blue or purple, the same colours as their spells. The courtesans swayed along, glassy-eyed and helpless once more, as the inky magic crossed the air, staining everyone it met. How can I save Philip from this? If he's lost to the spell, I don't think the missing shoe trick will work a second time. Honora blinked, and another dozen dancers were swaying to the sisters' song. Then a dozen more, and so it continued, ever closer. Only Prince Philip continued laughing, unaware of the danger as he beheld Honora herself. I've got no choice, then. "The prince!" she cried, grabbing him by the hand and pulling him for the door, tongues of magic snaking after them. "Oh, Charming, do come!" she called out through the ether to the ferryman, hoping he would materialize in his magic door to spring out from the castle wall. She looked around, but there was no telltale crack of light, just the shrieking demon snaring in her wake. "And would you be my Princess Charming?" Philip laughed, thinking it a game. She led him outside and begged the castle guard to shut the heavy wooden doors behind them. "Bolt them! Keep no one from leaving!" she commanded. But when the guard stared at her blankly, she stamped her feet and cried. "Such a face!" the prince said. Now, let's not ruin a pretty sight like your lovely smile. Guards, bar the door as the lady commands, else it'll be my frown you'll have to worry about." Clearly, he was only humouring her, but she didn't care. It was fine with her if Philip remained none the wiser about her horrid stepsisters. The last thing I need is for him to find out they would be his in-laws. In the back of her mind, a little voice admonished her for thinking so coolly about marrying a man she didn't love, a man to whom true love was so highly prized. Think of father. Do what must be done. She smiled at the prince. He smiled back, then, taking her hand, said,
Take a deep breath, my dear. Do you smell the rose garden in bloom in the cool night air?" He led her a few paces to the right of the palace gate, and from the top of the steps she could see a maze of crimson roses blooming below them. The scent of so many flowers drifted up to her, and she smiled in spite of her cares. "My mother always told me I'd find my destiny among the roses." The trusting look on his face broke through something Honora didn't even know was shielding her heart. Once upon a time, she might have been the girl Philip thought she was. Could I still be, now? "Tell me about your mother," she said. "Was she lovely?" But as the prince began to answer, her attention was divided. At the bottom of the steps, a team of workers moved an enormous cart of foodstuffs down the lane toward the castle's kitchen. A prize pumpkin rested in the center of the cart, drawing attention from the gawkers around the palace gates. Beyond the gawkers, Charming had materialized across the way. He looked stricken, and Honora felt her stomach tighten at the sight of his face. Oh, the prince was saying something important. Honora knew she should try and be more attentive to his royal highness, but it was impossible to turn away from the man she loved, glowering as he strode forward in her direction. Why does he glare at me as though I betray him? Did he not send me on this errand? Honora gripped the prince's hand tighter, turning to face him, and then, oomph, no time to think. Philip raised her into the air and spun her like a fancy dancer, and she felt her foot leaving the other shoe.
Only when you remove the shoes will you truly be able to give yourself to Philip. When that happens, you shall be his to keep.
"Charming! No!" she cried, craning her body to catch the look of fury on her lover's face, his wand at the ready as he blew a hole in the castle door. The prince laughed, mistaking himself again for Charming, thinking her protest a flirtation about the dancing. The magic of Charming's spell must have been invisible to the prince, for he didn't even seem to notice what was happening a few feet away. For a moment, Honora hung precipitously above the prince, who tried to set her gently upon the porch, but Charming's magic snaked around her, wrapping her body and sending it flying. She could feel the many layers of her dress trailing behind her. "Oh, at least I shall fall to a beautiful death and break my neck quite prettily." There was nothing to be done, either way. The other shoe sat sparkling in front of the chagrined prince as his intended bride flew away. Evidently a fairy princess after all. Curse it anyway. She tried to call to Charming, but it was futile. She was flying, and though it was only a few feet, she felt like the magical fairy the prince had taken her for after all. Like the dreamland where she visited her mother, glittering dust rained down in her wake, and the great inner domain of the giant pumpkin opened up beneath her, a sparkle of fairy dust and shimmering magic erupting through the stem and opening into the sky as she was drawn down into it. "Charming!" she cried, searching wildly for him. She hadn't meant to lose the shoe, not yet. She knew it had to happen, but not this way, not with his face drawn in pain. "My love!" she called, but she did not find him. The last set of eyes she locked with were Philip's instead. "Princess!" he called, a crystal slipper in his hand, his face pale with shock. Chapter 9. The walls of the pumpkin closed in on Honora, collapsing like the dreams she hadn't even realized she was clinging to. Had this been the plan all the while? To use me as a distraction, to break down the castle doors?
Why did I take it all so seriously, if Charming was only using me? Am I truly that daft? She fought to stay awake, but soon she fell into a deep, troubled sleep, cocooned inside the pumpkin shell. The muffled voice of the prince drifted into her subconscious. "Princess!" He sounded forlorn, confused. We've got that in common, at least. She fought to wake, to answer, but it seemed there was not enough air, and the effort was too taxing. The harder she tried to wake, the further she slipped into a familiar dreamland. She could see it now. The castle from her dreams was Philip's home. As though she was still on the outside of the pumpkin carriage, she watched it rapidly darkening in the fading sun, turning ever more into the dream castle from her midnight walks with Mother. Everything turned as crystalline as her slippers, here in the stillness of her mind's eye. But then it changed, and not for the better. Charming grew in stature, towering over the castle ramparts, his dark aura billowing through velvet robes, terrible and powerful over all. Demons danced in swirls of liquid color below. The kind Prince Philip bent at the waist as her stepsisters brutalized him. Such horrid dreams! Oh, let me wake from this nightmare. Mother, where are you?
"I'm here, Cinderella," came the cruel voice of the witch-mother, rolling down the castle steps to land on the bones of Honora's dearly departed mother. "Mummy's never coming back, little girl," the witch-mother hissed.
Oh, wake from this nightmare! Only a violent shaking began, and the girl reaching out for something to steady herself with. But reaching out in a dream is always futile. We have covered that, haven't we, dear reader? Honora opened her eyes to the glare of the witch-mother, teeth set and eyes narrowed, her breath stinking of flesh and garlic. It was all Honora could do not to gag. "I said, wake up, Cinderella. Light the fires, tend to the ash, take in the laundry, and take out the trash. The prince arrives today, and you not be lazy." Chapter 10. Honora was breathless with fear. Did the stepmother not realize she had attended the ball? Was she not still dressed in her finery? As the witch stormed out, Honora stole a glance at herself. Sackcloth. She felt herself breathe. Finally. She was in her quarters, not a shred of pumpkin guts to be found. Well, that's a relief anyway. Maybe it was all another bizarre dream. The servants who would normally have wandered bewitched into her room to harass her were otherwise enchanted this day, hard at work. She could hear them shuffling past in the hallway outside her room. "The prince," she heard one say. "A slipper," remarked another. Chitter-chatter, chitter-chatter. The house was alive with talk and a flurry with preparations. Honora sat up and put on her shoes. Not a crystal slipper in sight. She eased into her wooden clogs. Had it all been a dream? The castle, the evil dancing, the moment above the rose garden before sailing away from the prince into a giant pumpkin. Of course it was a dream. Who rides home in a giant pumpkin? And then there was the worst part. Charming, his face stricken and filled with rage as he discovered her in Prince Philip's arms. That was decidedly unreal. Tactile memory was fading, but she clung to what she could, dream or no dream. The slippers had burned her feet, like hot ice had seeped into her flesh, coursing through her like passion itself. Why would Charming do such a thing, making me feel his love with every step, if he truly wished to give me to the prince? Makes no sense. Unreal. definitely part of a dream. Honora tied on her apron, surprised to feel a weight shifting within. She reached into one of the deep pockets. Fur! A tiny squeaking mouse sniffed her hand when she liberated him from the pocket. "Oh, little mouse, wherever did you come from?" she asked. The mouse squeaked and leapt into the other pocket. When she reached in to retrieve the little darling, she found a hard, heavy weight instead. The crystal slipper! Her hand burned as she pulled it out, but she loved the way it felt. Oh, it was real! I knew it! She should have been heartbroken over the loss of her lover, but she couldn't help smiling at the weight and heat of that slipper, and she opened the apron pocket wider, looking for the queer mouse. Surely he was a minion of the ferryman's. She would entrust him with a message to Charming. She would tell him how she felt, plan or no plan. The dream was a bad omen. They needed to discuss it. There was time yet, and they could change their tack. Look as she might, though, the mouse was gone. "Oh, Magic Mouse," she said. "Thank you anyway. Tell your master that—" She hesitated. Tell him what exactly? That I love him. He knows. He doesn't want my love, though, does he? He only wants my service. He only wants power. He only wants... Honora didn't honestly know any more. Tell him I hope he was successful in his mission, she whispered to the empty room before making her way to the nearby kitchens. There was no point standing around talking to invisible mice about ferrymen who didn't care for her. Care or not, he had promised to help her free her father, and she had a prince to win if she meant to keep her end of the bargain. Chapter 11. "A prince? A prince?" the cook muttered. "Never fancied I'd be feeding a prince from my kitchen." She stood with her hands on her hips. Honora was afraid to disturb her, so she joined Edith Rose at the food preparation table, where she was folding linens for the dining room. "Been muttering like that all morning," Edith Rose said, smiling. "Best tend to your fires before she puts you to work and you fall behind schedule. I'm sure the mistress woke you first today, didn't she?" Of all the servants, the cook and her daughter seemed least affected by the demons and the witch-mother. Honora remembered they had always been good-tempered before the arrival of the demon stepsisters and their horrid mother. Now that she had seen the trio hold sway over the court, Honora wondered why they stayed untouched. Was it goodwill alone? I would ask you a question," Honora whispered to Edith Rose. "Yes, my lady. Can you ask after you get them fires lit?" She winked. Honora's question caught in her throat. Why was Edith Rose so concerned about the witch-mother's orders? What if she were a spy? Would Honora be whisked away to the cellars? She seemed to be present to attend to the prince. She took a deep breath and smiled. "Never mind," she said. "It shall hold." Edith Rose gave her a knowing look. "On second thought, help me with these linens first." Honora took the end of a tablecloth and began to fold. Edith Rose took the other end, and when they met in the middle, Honora could hear her humming the song of the ferryman, faintly. Her heart grew cold as she imagined her lover in the arms of Edith Rose. Where else would she have learned that tune? But then, as they each drew back with their own ends of the tablecloth, she saw the warm smile in Edith Rose's eyes and realized she could not make an enemy of the one other girl in the house who seemed unspoiled by the demon's touch. No matter what relationship this girl had with her lover, she must press forward.
She would need whatever allies she could get.
Oh, how I wish I could just talk to Charming.
It was no good, though.
She came when Charming called, and rarely had it ever been elsewise. Mayhap he only ever kept me under his protection. Maybe it wasn't love at all, just saved for a later use.
Now that he'd used her to get to the prince...
The prince? How long until he arrives? Honora asked. This time it was the cook who answered.
We'll prepare dinner for His Highness, through his social coordinator. I surely ain't. She said with a laugh. Girls, get over here and brine these birds when ye finish with those linens. And mind you wash your hands till they're raw. This entire castle reeks of sex and surely ain't fit for a prince. Mayin' for once that wicked magic might come in handy. Sure ain't helping out on a regular day, but mayin' for once, if she turns it on to blow the bad air out.
Speak of the devil, Edith Rose whispered. The stepmother beamed from the doorway of the kitchens, her hair drawn up into an elegant French twist. She already wore the first of what would be many gowns worn that day, and it swirled about her figure in a lush display. Something moved Honora to ask after the well-being of her father, but she knew better. It felt as though it had been a month since she'd seen him, but she didn't dare mention his name to the witch, lest he be further punished into screaming for Honora's benefit. "Cook!" the witch shrilled. The cook blanched, and she curtsied to her mistress, avoiding eye contact. "Milady," she stammered, "forgive me, I've got a unique menu request, Cookie," the witch-mother crooned. "Today the prince shall choose one of my daughters as his queen, and to celebrate, we shall dine on something uniquely homegrown." The cook managed a tight smile. "Begging your pardon, milady, but these lovely birds were raised here on the grounds, and—" "Long pork," the witch-mother said. "When the prince announces his choice at dinner, we shall move directly to the castle and take up residence. There are certain livestock here at the manor we shall no longer be in need of," the witch-mother hissed. The cook stared in shock, all colour draining from her face. "What does she mean by long pork?" Honora whispered to her friend. Edith Rose shook her head, confused. "I trust you shall consult your finest recipes," the witch-mother continued, casting her eyes around the room to study the kitchen staff, one by one. "I would find something myself, but, as you noted, my hands are full overseeing the cleansing of the house to make it fit for royalty." And, with that, she winked wickedly before turning to let the train of her gown flare behind her. They heard her call from down the hallway. "His lordship does have such a tenderness about him, does he not? I shall miss him, I think. Tell Cinderella to light the fires. It's cold in this manor, and I want to see blazes." The cook fell to her knees. Honora and Edith Rose ran to her, and were quickly joined by the other kitchen help. "Mamma!" the girl said. "Dear Cookie!" cried Honora. The cook hung her head for another moment, then took a deep breath. "Get back to work, the lot of ye!" she barked, and the crowd dispersed, all but her daughter and her true mistress. She whispered, "She means for us to cook his lordship for the prince's supper, she does." Honora felt as though she would vomit, and now it was the cook's turn to comfort her as she fell to her own knees. "Milady," the cook said, and behind her words she heard the ferryman's song. "We're here to help you. Whatever errand he sets you on, we'll help. He's kept my daughter pure through all of this occupation, as it were. I'd pledge my very life, if need be, to help you with your mission." She rose to her feet and dabbed tears away from her cheeks on the hem of her apron. She and her daughter each lent Honora a hand and helped her back to her feet. "Don't be afraid," the cook continued. "There won't be any long pork in this kitchen if the three of us here and the wee ferryman have anything to say about it. Now, let's all get back to work before them daughters of hers decide to pay us a visit as well."
Chapter 12. It wasn't long before the prince's arrival was heralded by the royal footmen and their sterling silver trumpets. Honora fretted nervously in the kitchen's keep, uncertain how she would go about getting the prince alone to present him with the crystal slipper in her pocket. She thought about it as she lit all the fires, though the demons were especially rough on her today. She spat ashes more than once, and had inhaled so much soot she wondered if she would turn black on the inside. What prince would be taken with me now? She looked upon her filthy sackcloth, and wondered if Charming would transform her again, or if she must make her way to the prince covered in ash. She reached into her pocket and felt the slipper. Her fingers slid inside, and she felt the shoe warm to her touch. Edith Rose spied through the milky panes of glass in the kitchen window to the courtyard, where a gate afforded a sliver of view to the household drive beyond. "You want to glimpse His Royal Highness that badly?" Honora asked. Edith Rose did not answer, but her face coloured deeply, instantly. "Would that you could meet him in my stead," Honora sighed. For a moment she thought of wishing it so, of forcing Charming to change the deal, but that would not have saved her father. The last time she had seen her darling dad, he had been seeping blood as he walked, bent and broken in painful half-steps down the hallway of the manor he'd once proudly commanded. No, she must follow the dictate of the ferryman. She couldn't risk wishing things away, now that she'd come so far. The witch-mother and stepsisters were keen to entertain the royal heir on the manor grounds, and so Honora and Edith Rose were busied opening all of the windows throughout the manor, fanning the rooms, and moving on to the next, while the rest of the manor staff dealt with the cleaning, setting up the dining room, and preparing the food. From the windows, Honora could see the demon sisters hanging on the prince like hungry jackals. It was impossible to tell if he was taken with them at all from her vantage point, high up in the castle's solar. Finally, she made her way to her father's wing of the chateau. As she crept into his room, the pungent odour of his enslavement sickened her. She ran to the windows, throwing aside the heavy tapestries that shut out almost all light, and opening the heavy frame to let in fresh air. The light woke her father, and he stirred in his bed, moaning. "Shh, father, shh," Honora said, patting his hand. "It'll be all right, Papa. Your pain is nearly over." "Water," he croaked, and she quickly reached for a decanter on the bedside table, too quickly, causing it to tip over and spill. She cringed, afraid of any moment of being caught in her father's room. What would her stepmother do? She'd scarcely been allowed to see her father since the witch had moved in. Honora held the water to her father's lips. "Slowly," she whispered, when he tried to gulp it down. "It won't be long now, Papa. Just endure." She replaced the bottle on the bedside table and returned to the window. The sisters' backs were to the manor as they danced upon the grave of Honora's mother. Honora felt her heart fill with rage. It was then that she noticed the prince's expression, disapproval, as he turned to walk away. He did not appear to be under their spell, unlike when she had first found him at the ball. Had Charming somehow protected the prince with his magic as well? Honora watched as the witch-mother strolled behind the prince, her fingers walking across his shoulder blades seductively. resting her head on his shoulder. She was singing something, chanting in time with the demon girls. The same blue and purple stains of magic hovered on the air around them, but a black magic aura spread out as well. She couldn't hear what the prince was saying, but she could tell that he was speaking and pointing at her mother's headstone. Honora smiled. I should back away from the window, just in case. But it was too late. The witch's mother's head shot up as if Honora had called out to her. The woman glared at her from across the grounds. "You must run, child," her father said. "Run and hide. Survive," he said. "I am not long for this world, and I shall rejoin your sweet mother in eternity." "Daddy, no!" Honora said, leaning over her father to kiss his paper-thin skin gently one last time before she must flee. It hadn't been so long that her father had seemed young, robust, in the prime of life. The witch and her demons had drained more than fluids and gold from him. "I have a plan, Father. You will be restored," she said. No more could she say, though, before the chanting, "Cinderella, Cinderella," rose from the ground floor of the castle. The demons were coming for her.
Chapter 13. She ran, but, finding nowhere else to go, she climbed up the southeastern tower stairs. A dead end! What now? Shall I jump from the turret and hope for another overgrown melon on the ground below? She heard the rustling of skirts and the sharp laughter of the demon sisters chasing her on the spiral staircase behind her. "Charming," she whispered, and as she looked over her shoulder to see the inhumanly long arm of a demon stretching toward her, she felt the grip of Charming's hand on her wrist, pulling her into his body. His lair opened up around them. Impossible! Where did it come from, this trove? There was no room behind the wall from which the door opened, just more staircase. But here she was, in Charming's treasure vault again. "Charming," she began, but he shushed her. With a swipe of his palm in the air, she felt layers of grime wash away. The sackcloth dress was gone, and the crystal slipper awaited on a velvet pillow on the floor before her. She was absolutely bare before him.
"For the last time,"
he said, pulling her toward him by the hips before moving his hands to her face, cradling it gently as they stared at one another, eye to eye. Finally, when the girl thought she could bear it no more, and that she would wish herself his forever, he kissed her so passionately that she lost her place in time, her very identity, her fear of this truth written as plainly across her face as it had become etched upon her heart. "I am no one without him." All she'd ever wanted, all would ever need, lived and died inside this kiss. This man, this magical man, the love of her life, the man she would never leave, never betray, never wish away. She tried to draw away from the kiss. "I shall tell him. I shall wish it so." He kissed her harder, holding her close and cupping her bottom with his hands until her body begged for him to spread her legs and claim her. "Claim me. Oh, Charming, you want me. I know you do. Oh, make me yours, my love, and we'll work out the rest." She would have begged, but he refused to grant her the use of her own lips. Instead, he kissed her harder, his fingers working her pleasure zones, teasing her to the heights of ecstasy. She felt as though she'd tumbled down a mountainside of kisses, a landslide of chocolate and fluffy things and feathers, all heat and kisses and sex. And she wasn't sure how, but from his lips to his cock she had moved, mouthing him greedily. She heard him cry out, his fingers gripping her skull, and he shuddered hard once, twice, a third time, filling her hot mouth with this sweet honeycomb she had grown to love inside her. If this isn't love, I don't know what is. She wanted his baby. She wanted him, a real life with him, and she didn't care if it were the effects of magic or not. She wanted Charming and no one else. I will have no prince. He is my prince. His hands roamed about her sex with the touch of a lover, with the familiarity only he knew. He rubbed her harder, harder, until she came, her belly tightening in a series of spasms that rocked her to the core. She had a few deep breaths before her mind had enough oxygen to think, and then she righted herself from the rollicking tide of sex. All around her the world could burn. What did it matter? She found her bearings in his emerald eyes. Charming, I love you, she said. I wish to... He waved his palm again, and she could speak no more. A satin gag tied between her lips. Tears streamed down Charming's cheeks. Save your father, he whispered. Win the prince. And with that, he lifted his wand, and the fabric whirled and swirled. Her hair bounced and curled. Jewels flew through the air, and she could smell freshly pressed rose petals in the air. Charming stooped before her on one knee as Honora looked down at her gloved hands and glared at the pearls he had dressed her with on each wrist. He handed her the pillow, the crystal slipper resting on top. Go, he said, and the door to his trove opened, although Charming remained prone, his head bowed. Honora hesitated. She wanted Charming, might always want Charming, but she must do her duty, or else he'd never hear her out. The gag untied itself and fell to the ground. She remembered the poor shell of her father upstairs in the solar, and, without looking back at her lover again, she walked out the door, straight into the dining hall where the prince was seated betwixt the two demon sisters. This is really happening, right now. She turned to say goodbye to Charming, but the door was gone. Chapter 14. The prince rose. The other sister, at last! If ever a woman in the kingdom were more enthusiastically greeted by a handsome member of the royal family, she was quite sure that woman might have died of happiness. Though her heart was breaking with each step away from Charming, she couldn't help but return the prince's smile. And she comes bearing gifts, I see, Philip continued. Well, I have one of my own. A footman brought his Royal Highness a glossy oaken box, and the prince opened it, withdrawing a crystal slipper to match the one Honora's pillow held. What witchcraft is this? The stepmother demanded, rushing Honora and grabbing for the pillow. Evil sister, the demons shrieked. Stealing our slippers is not allowed. But neither the prince nor Honora seemed to hear, moving in a capsule of their own. Philip moved calmly toward his intended bride and knelt before her with the shoe. Honora was vaguely aware of the prince's guard as they pulled the witch-mother and her demon daughters away from the royal couple. As Honora slipped her foot into the shoe, the prince waited with an open palm for the next. Truly, Honora found it nearly impossible to concentrate on anything other than his gleamingly white teeth, his handsome jaw, but somehow she managed to present him with the other slipper. She expected her feet to burn once more, but instead of the hot sensation of Charming's love, she felt the cold, hard crystal only. Tears brimming in her eyes, she fought to continue smiling at her soon-to-be fiancé. Philip naturally misunderstood, taking her tears for those of pure happiness at the thought of becoming his bride. He rose and whispered into her ear, "It'll be all right, my love. We've found one another at last, and nothing shall ever separate us again." Then, clearing his throat and stepping backward, Honora's hand held gently in his own, on high, he asked, "My beautiful lady, would you concede to marry me and be my queen?" The sisters screamed their protest, and the witch gasped in shock while the servants hurrahed. All but Edith Rose, who hid her face in her palms and turned away. The prince's footmen tooted trumpets and banged drums, shouting hurrahs of their own, until Honora demurely bowed her head in acquiescence to the prince's request. Philip threw his head back in laughter, and twirled Honora by the wrists about the room with such joy she couldn't help but laugh, herself, though her mirth leaked through a hole in her heart. "Philip is truly delightful. If I only hadn't feelings for Charming." She wondered if, in time, that hole would heal. "And now we must away, my love," the prince said, before giving Honora a chaste kiss. In a whisper, he added, "I shan't like for your sisters to begin dancing again." "But my father will be guarded night and day by my finest men," the prince assured her. "But his wife is "I know what she is," the prince said. "The magic of the king's own sorcerer shall guard your father until we work out a way to release him." Honora didn't know what to say. She counted on Charming, watching over her father, but she had never expected this from Philip. "But truly, my love, come and meet my father, for he shall cherish your sweet face," Philip said with a smile. And so she did. Chapter 15. A portrait of the late queen hung prominently outside the king's private study. Long, silky blonde hair hung bountifully around an angelic face. And those eyes, such bright green eyes. Honora felt as though the painting were watching her, but deeper within, she felt a stirring when she looked in those eyes. The king slumped in a leather chaise, old and fragile. Honora had expected to meet His Royal Highness in the throne room. Not being exactly sure what kings did all day, she had never considered he might have an office, or retire to private quarters in ill health, not unlike her own papa. "Father," Philip called, "I have found someone you must meet. Now, you can grow well and delight, for surely your line will continue." Philip hugged Honora tight against his chest as the old king looked at her appraisingly. She felt sick, at once grateful for the slippers freezing her feet. They were the only thing keeping her cool now that the crucible of impending marriage was heating. "You aspire to be the mother of my grandchildren, then?" the old man asked. "Are you up for rousing a nation, leading the women, charming the enemy if necessary?" "Charming the enemy?" she tried to ask, but all that came out was a whisper. Truly, Honora had never thought beyond saving her father. Cleaning fireplaces and raising chickens were the biggest jobs she ever faced. She smiled at the king. "Charming." Then all her vision became a pinhole, and she slipped, sliding down the tunnel of light into the well of darkness. The prince whispered into her ear, but all she could say was, "Charming," in a whisper of her own, and the lights went completely out. Chapter 16. "I'm so very proud of you, Honora," her mother said, floating high now above the tallest tower in the royal castle. Her long pink butterfly wings stretched out into the night sky, glittering as though a galaxy of stars were embedded in each. It seemed as though her mother floated away on a kite string, rising slowly and gently while Honora fought to be heard below. An evil wind whipped her voice away from her, but she was determined, so she persevered. "Mother, I know this is a dream, but I must know the truth," she said. "You must answer me, and you mustn't wake me to spare me the knowledge," she said, calling up from the precipice. "As you wish," came her mother's smiling reply. Honora felt a stab of pain in her heart, but pressed on. "You spoke about love and about honor, Mother. Remember? I thought you were telling me I was bound by love and honor to protect Daddy, but you meant Charming, didn't you? I am bound by love to him, bound by honor to the prince. Which should I serve?" "You're a good girl, Honora," the dream mother replied, rising faster now. Honora knew their time was short, and her desperation grew as her mother rose into the heavens, her sparkling wings now filling out the night sky, blending them into waves of purple, midnight, indigo, and the deepest violet. "Am I doing the right thing, Mother? Oh, please, you must answer. You promised." The dream mother was but a twinkling star in the sky now, and Honora strained to keep from blinking. She understood that in dreamland, when one stops watching a magical talking star, that it winks out and goes away, never to return. Clearer, louder, truer than ever, Honora's mother's voice filled her ears. "My darling daughter," she said, "you are a good girl, and I love you. Your father loves you. You have always been unable to do wrong, so pure is your heart. My daughter, you should do as you wish, my love. Honor your heart, Honora. As long as you do that, you'll never go wrong." And then Honora cried, both in the dream as well as in her sleep. She awoke to see a solitary shining star through a pane of clear glass in a nearby window. "Goodbye, Mother," she whispered, closing her eyes and wiping away tears. When she opened her eyes again, the star was gone. Chapter 17. Honora awoke to the unfamiliar voices of the castle maids.
"She called him Charming even as she fell," she heard a woman say. "We mayn't hurt her, but true love it is, I'd say," the woman went on. "I couldn't have chosen better than that for our Prince Charming."
Honora opened her eyes with a start. The ladies-in-waiting had loosened her corset and almost removed it as she slept. Her lonely bosom was chilled, and she drew the bed-cover around her for warmth. Morning sunlight poured into the room through stained glass windows, but it was a very cold space. The entire palace is cold, much colder than I imagined it would be. She shivered as she sat up, determined to start the day.
"Don't know how you got into that thing,"
a kind handmaiden said. She brought a tray of tea and biscuits, which she slid onto a side table.
"Must have been magic o' sorts, I reckon."
She reminded Honora of a more elegantly dressed version of Cookie.
"Something like that,"
Honora said, remembering the way Charming had dressed her so magically with his silks and jewels, suddenly made her feel even colder. "Think of your father, Honora." She took a deep breath. "In all the haste, I hadn't had time to arrange for my own servants to attend me here. You're quite lovely, but I'm terribly homesick already. Might there be a way I could send for my handmaiden from home?
Whatever your highness be a-wishing, of course, the woman said, although I'll do my very best by you in the meantime.
Too kind, Honora said. She let the handmaiden show her where a fresh change of clothing awaited. Edith Rose arrived within hours, as though the king's fastest horsemen galloped her to the palace themselves. Honora squealed in delight at the sight of her friend, and said as much about the galloping. I'm fairly sure we could have gotten here much faster if Charming'd send us, Edith Rose said. Honora felt a stab of pain. I'm so glad you're here, she said. Apparently, the wedding is tomorrow. Edith Rose frowned. They say the prince will be expecting a child right away, mistress. He's waited so long to find his true love and all. There was no point in speaking about it. Neither girl was there to wed her true love, but they were true friends, and as such they did their duty to one another, and to their king, their promises, and their friendship. Arm in arm, they drew breath together and sighed, laughing to keep from crying. After a deep breath, Edith Rose continued. But come on, let's go and see about the dress, shan't we? And there'll be jewellery, naturally. Oh, a crown for your pretty hair, and flowers. Honora couldn't help but laugh. Maybe she was broken, bruised and bewildered, but her friend was here now, and soon she would free her father with the help of the little ferryman. And then, well, perhaps when all of that was accomplished, she could find it in her heart to fall in love with Philip, for real and for truly. He seemed a good man. He certainly deserved to be loved. They found the royal dressmaker awaiting them. Hours later, layers of silk, hundreds of beads, dozens of jewels, and thousands of flowers sewn from silk adorned a pristine confection of a gown, so immaculate that Honora wondered if even Charming could have spun such a thing. The day's fittings were a marathon of work, and, with only a finger sandwich and a glass of wine, sunset found the future Princess Honora collapsed in her bed, her friend Edith tucked snugly against her like a spoon. I used to sleep like this with Charming, Honora whispered into the darkness. Edith Rose laughed softly. Of course you did, milady. I miss him terribly, Honora confessed. Of course you do, milady, Edith Rose replied. You love him truly. Honora rolled over in her bed and eyed her friend suspiciously. Just what do you think you know about such things? Edith Rose laughed. I know enough, milady. She rolled onto her back and stretched. Then she spoke again, with the same musical tones Charming had always used. You love the ferryman and I love the prince. Let's cut out our hearts and make us mince. One man will love you, the other make you wince. We'll sort it out together before you put on your chintz. By the time you are wed, the choice will be made. Memories by nature are destined to fade. So reach out for tomorrow, for what you have prayed. Else we look for a blessing and find it's a blade. Honora was flabbergasted. How do you do that? Do what? Edith Rose asked, yawning. Sound like Charming. Sing talk, make up rhymes. Not sure, Edith Rose confessed. Must have some fairy blood myself. Would be nice to summon treasure whenever you needed it, I suppose, Honora said, although granting wishes and what-not seems a dangerous business, now that I consider it. Oh, Charming's been cursed, no question, Edith Rose said, sleep now slurring her speech. No, I'm a lucky one. Whatever happened to that wee man? He ain't said to me. But he's a bitter draught of ale, I reckon." After a moment of silence, Edith Rose snored. And Nora did not share her friend's luck. Sleep refused to come, despite the exhaustion from wedding preparations. All she could think about was the happily ever after to come. Why didn't it feel happy? The portrait of the late Queen and her green wounded eyes stared down at her regally from on high, in her memory. Was she judging Honora for being less than true to her son? Or was it something else? Sleep intruded onto Honora's thoughts just long enough for her subconscious to connect the dots. Green eyes. Emerald eyes. Charming's emeralds. Charming's eyes. She sat up. Something glowed green on the other side of the room. She threw off the covers and found the source of the light. The crystal slippers. Honora placed her fingers inside one and found it surprisingly warm. "Charming!" she shouted. The door swung inward, and the golden light of Charming's trove spilled out from behind tapestry. Honora rushed to the wall covering and moved it out of the way with one arm, shielding her eyes against the light with the other.
"I'm here as you wish, madam,"
the ferryman said, as stiffly and cold as a stranger. Honora opened her mouth to speak, but words? What were words? All she knew was the raw emotion of longing and heartbreak, and it rose into her chest like a cobra, fanning out through her breast and pressing against her lungs so that she might not breathe. Charming stepped past her and bent beside the sleeping form of Edith Rose, kissing the girl lightly on the cheek before turning and exiting Honora's bedchamber.
"By your leave, your highness,"
his voice echoed down the hall. Chapter 18. Crash, bang, rumble. The tower shook. Honora ran to Edith Rose and woke her, the girls clasping one another firmly as the building swayed. Prince Philip appeared in the doorway, his arms outstretched to grasp the entryway, a look of sheer panic on his face.
"You are well, I see," he said, then lifted one hand to his eyes to preserve the lady's modesty. "Forgive the intrusion, ladies, but the castle seems to be under attack."
His sentence was punctuated by another rumble, another boom.
"In all my life, I never imagined this palace could be moved, even by the battering rams of the barbarians." But Honora knew that it was no barbarian who rocked the castle this night. Should she tell her future husband that she's let loose an angry ferryman into the castle to challenge his father's wizard? In another world, in any other reality, full disclosure would be the only course of action to her liege. But the matter remained of saving her father, of Charming attaining his potion. Edith Rose blessedly kept her mouth shut. In fact, Honora wasn't sure the girl breathed at all while Philip lingered in the doorway. "Dear ladies," he continued, "I must away to secure father's well-being. I beg of you, remain in your chamber until I return. Be assured that I shall investigate what mischief is afoot, and quell it within the hour." Philip was gone scarcely a moment before Edith Rose slipped into a dressing gown from Honora's trousseau and began to rifle through the bureau in search of reasonable shoes.
"Everything in here's quite lovely," she sighed, "but there's nary a pair of sensible shoes for running and fetching." Edith Rose shook her head and then slipped into her own old work clogs, stowed beneath the bed. "Hate to go out in your Royal Highness's finery with mismatched shoes, but it is what it is." She was halfway out the door when Honora threw herself at her in protest. "And just where do you think you're going?" Honora said. "You can't just abandon me." Edith Rose curtsied. That dressing gown fits her quite prettily, Honora thought. Begging your pardon, milady, but I just can't let the crown prince of the kingdom, your future husband, tear off into a battle without making sure the palace guard is alerted, at the very least. Edith Rose grasped Honora by the wrist. Come with me. You know you want to see what Charming's up to. What if he's killed milady? Could you stand away below like a prisoner while he draws his dying breath? The sounds of the battle led the girls to the tallest turret in the castle, on the furthest end of the fortress from the street entrance. At the base, the castle guard stood frozen, unable to ascend. Some queer magic, milady, the captain of the guard apologized. I cannot move. Take my sword, he pleaded, and Honora happily obliged him, though it was quite heavy and difficult for her to bear. Here, far away from the ceremonial outer chambers of the business of royalty, the staircase was cramped. Built for functionality only, it twirled stories into the night sky like an angry needle against the darkness. Edith Rose grabbed a torch from the landing and started up, Honora close behind. No stained glass or elegant sconces lit their way, just arrow slits and a proliferation of cobwebs, which the girls saw hanging thicker and thicker as they ascended. They emerged onto a platform at the top of the tower, and Honora fairly crashed into Edith Rose, who had stopped dead in her tracks. A massive spider, its torso the size of a rhinoceros, crouched nimbly on one side of the circular landing that constituted the top floor of the tower. The king's magician rode atop the beast stiffly, a crystal vial held aloft in one hand, a crackling staff in the other. Bolts of lightning emitted from the top of the staff, arching a few feet before being drawn into the wand of Charming, who stood with his hip thrust out, his free hand resting atop it with attitude. He swirled his wand in a lazy oval over his head, as though he were trying to tempt the powerful sorcerer into unleashing an even greater power upon him. On the far side of the circle, the old king was on his knees, his hands clasped as if in prayer. Dressed in only a thin nightgown, all regal accoutrements were gone by the wayside in the emergency. Honora realized that if she hadn't already known he was the king, he'd have just looked like any frail old man. There's nothing special about him that I can see. Just a poor old man begging. Philip moved to stand before Edith Rose, though it seemed he dared not take his eyes from the battle. "Honora," he called, "return to your chambers." Edith Rose pried the sword from her hand and tried to shoo her as well, shoving the torch at her. At the sound of her name, Charming's gaze faltered, and, while his eyes were trained on the staircase, on what little of Honora he could see behind Philip and Edith Rose, the magician struck. "Foolish boy!" the old man cackled, as Charming's body hit the floor of the turret. The spider scrambled toward the little ferryman, and that was all Honora could take. Pushing Edith Rose and the prince out of her way, she dove for her lover, thrusting the length of her body atop him before the spider could hurt him. She felt the pincers sink deep into her back, the fangs break the skin at her neck, and then all was dark. Just the heavy weight of the spider's body fell atop her. Chapter 19. Two voices sang in unison. Wake thee, slake thee, heal my girl, rise and ready, conquer the world. She was groggy, the spider's poison potent within her. Was that the king, on his knees before her? "Not another one! Not another! Oh, please, Rump, please!"
"I'm working as fast as I can," the magician answered. "My boy is helping. but do not interrupt again."
Honora pressed her eyes closed, for her vision was doubling and tripling. When she opened them, Philip was dragging the spider away and attempting to wrest a sword from Edith Rose. So, Edith Rose had killed the spider. I shall have to thank her. The singing grew louder, stronger. She felt the warmth of Charming's love on her left side, the cold power of the old magician, not unlike the feel of the cold, hard shoes, on the other.
Take me, break me, rule my heart, promise me, princess, we'll never part. I'll sing you a love song, you'll spend me some gold, and we'll make a family as magic foretold. Awake for me, quake for me, future and past. Love is the only magic that lasts.
And Honora felt herself healed, but she could not stop crying. Tears flowed until they pooled in the cracks of the stone floor, and she rushed to Charming, the only man besides her father she'd ever loved. "Thank you," she began, but he cut her off.
"No, Honora," he whispered. "This isn't over yet. It is my father's fault you nearly died. All he seems to know is destruction."
He stepped in front of her and cast his wand at the old man again. The magician cackled, easily deflecting the spell.
"You love her, do you? You wish to protect her, as my story taught you not?"
The old man held the vial of potion up to his face.
"Does beauty overpower logic? Does love conquer all? Do you think you'll fare better than I, with a beauty more modest?"
He laughed at his own cruel jest. The wicked old man's crumpled face, the very opposite of beauty. He was ugly, he knew it, and he delighted in it.
"Please, Rumpelstiltskin,"
the king said again,
"I beg of you, hand the vial to me. Don't do this. Philip will keep you on as counsel for as long as you like. Won't you, son?"
Philip shook his head in agreement, obviously as bewildered as the girls at what was transpiring between the old men. Whatever had gone before between the king and the magician, only Charming seemed to fully understand. Honora wanted to interrupt the negotiations now at hand, but feared the repercussions that would surely arise from meddling between sorcerers and regents.
"Very well, then," said the magician. "As you wish."
These words broke the spell on Honora. Whatever was inside the bottle was nothing that would do her lover any good. Whatever his plans were, exactly, she wasn't clear, but she would not see him follow in the footsteps of... Oh, God! She realized. His father! Time seemed to slow as the old man handed the tiny pink crystal bottle to the aged king. It was trimmed in gold, with an emerald set into the cap, and it caught the torchlight as it passed from the hand of the wizard near the hand of the king. The king wasn't looking, though, and as Philip gasped, he looked away still. Without thinking, Honora threw herself between the two old men, right into the path of the falling vial. She had intended on catching the bottle. Truly she had. But Edith Rose had the very same idea, and, seeing that Charming had already lifted his wand to strike at Rumpelstiltskin, Edith Rose had thrown herself at Honora, blocking her from Charming's blast. It all happened so quickly, Honora wasn't quite sure what had happened. Only Edith Rose collided into her, jarring the king and his precious bottle so that for a few milliseconds it tossed in the air, end over end before crashing, breaking into a million glittering splinters on the stone floor. A pink serum leaked out and mixed with the tears Honora had shed, and crept toward the blood of the giant spider. All were aghast as the form of a woman rose from the puddle. She rotated before them, the singularly most beautiful woman any of them had ever beheld.
"My love!"
rasped the king.
"Mother!"
cried both Philip and Charming in unison. The late queen smiled down on all of them. "If you truly love me, set me free," she whispered, her words lost to the high winds as soon as they were spoken.
"The same thing you said to me, Sleeping Beauty?"
Rumpelstiltskin said.
"You never would stay with me and our son, even when I told ye my name."
"She loved me,"
the king bellowed, rising to stand on shaky feet at last. And, though he was old, Amorous saw in that moment why in his youth he turned the head of every lady in the land, quite as his son Philip did. But, unlike Philip, he was bitter, possessive.
"She never loved you. You only tricked her into staying with you, into bearing your child."
The king gestured at Charming as he said it, and Honora saw her lover's face colour, even in the darkness. "It was never a potion of all power at all, was it?" Honora asked, before she could stop herself. "It was your mother you wanted." And then all the men were staring at her, staring as though she were killing them each, ever so gleefully with her observations. The prince, heartbroken at the sight of his deceased mother's spectre. The king, proud and ferocious as an old lion claiming his mate. And finally, the opportunist-turned sorcerer Rumpelstiltskin, haggard and insane with greed. Did a man like that even know what love was? Honora couldn't count Charming among them, though he was clearly as emotive as the rest. His father might have been a goblin, but his mother was a legendary queen. He was truly in a class of his own. Was it any wonder he was so tortured? Who on this earth could understand such a soul? Oh, Charming! As handsome as his mother was beautiful, as fierce as his father's greed, how I love you. And then the spectre began to sing. Love is no weakness, beauty no power. I'll leave you, darlings, within the hour. Reach out to each other as friends and as brothers. Love one another when I leave this tower. Lust for gold or beauty or power brings only ruin into your bower. So if you love me, let me go. I'll never leave your heart. But you must cease or never know the freedom peace imparts. I go now to my final rest. Please keep with you my love. Be good, dear children. I'll be watching from the heavens above." The rose-coloured image of Her Royal Highness drifted right off the side of the turret. Honora felt as though she were in a dream, the dream she'd had of her own mother leaving. She knew Charming wanted to throw himself after her, to grasp at his mother and hug her to him, never let her go. His eyes were wild, his face ashen and drawn, as he panted in the darkness. The prince looked no better, and Edith Rose clung to him, begging him to be sane. The king lay prone, muttering to himself of his own shame, while Rumpelstiltskin screamed at the spectre from the edge of the circle. "Love is weakness. Beauty is power. You're wrong. You never understood because you never went without." And then he was raging, truly tempestuous in the starlight, as he broke his staff over his own knee, and screamed out in pain. Honora thought she heard the quiet pop of a bone breaking before the angry magician fell to the floor. "She wasn't wrong, Father," Charming said, coolly. "You were wrong. Wrong to try and keep what wasn't yours. Wrong to use what you had to gain power. There's more to life than power." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I know that now. I hope you will leave in peace." The old man looked up at his son, what was left of his teeth bared like an animal backed into a corner. "How many times have I told you, boy? Do not call me father!" Rising to his feet with the aid of his broken staff, he turned in his rage to cast punishing magic at his son, the firstborn of Sleeping Beauty, the son he had tricked a queen into bearing him, the son he had never wanted. Raging off balance, Rumpelstiltskin lost his footing and tumbled sideways on his broken leg. No one tried to save him as he tumbled over the edge of the low turret wall, an angry hobgoblin, clothed in finery, but not in dignity nor power. "Father!" Charming shouted, peering over the edge as the old man fell. For a few moments the old man shot magic all around him, and a kind of lightning bubble flashing about him as he fell. But then he began to spin in the air, his magician's gowns flapping horribly, before he grew small and helpless in the distance below. His body made a final terrible splash, far below in the bay at the cliff bottom, far below the castle. "Father," Charming said, under his breath. "Goodbye." "Father!" It was Philip's turn to agonize now, as the king fell again to his knees, and then slumped onto his back. The magic," he rasped. It was keeping me." "My father's magic was keeping your father alive," Charming explained, dropping to his knees before the dying king. "Your Highness, shall I try and heal you?" "My boy," the king said, "I am already in your debt, and I do not wish to deepen it. I do not wish to put my family into debt to any sorcerer ever again. Grant me but a moment to bless my son, please, and then I shall go." The wind died down at last, and, in the stillness, Honora could hear the king and Prince Philip tearfully saying their goodbyes. There were final words of wisdom about ruling, about the kingdom. about peace, and then the king seemed to be giving Philip his blessing to marry.
"And you shall find a good wife in—"
"Edith Rose!" Honora shouted, kneeling before her king and her fiancé. "He shall take Edith Rose, your Royal Highness, for it would be unkind of me to separate two people clearly made for one another, especially when my heart lies elsewhere."
"Rose?"
Philip asked. "My mother always said I'd find my destiny among the roses." The words echoed in Honora's mind. Of course it was Edith Rose for Philip, all along. Charming came to the right house when he sought your mate. He just chose the wrong girl. The king nodded, even as Philip's face flushed with the heat of embarrassment.
Are you sure, Honora?" he said. "I shan't betray a promise, but if you do not love me, truly, then—"
Honora turned and looked into the handsome prince's eyes. "I regret that I ever misled you. Believe me when I say I did it for love. But now that it's all said and done, I can't allow you to marry for anything less than true love, my prince." She took his hand into her own and kissed it gently. "Edith Rose," she called to her friend, who leaned against the wall in evidence of a full-body swoon. "Come and join your husband to say good-bye to your father the king. I've my own father to see about." Chapter 20. Honora was turning to rejoin Charming at the edge of the wall when the purple and cyan swirls of demon smoke she recognized as her stepsisters ascended the tower like twin creeping dragons.
"Forgive me, boy,"
she heard the king say, and then he was gone. She felt it in her gut and in her chest, but there would be no time to grieve. "Charming!" Honora yelled. "Can you defeat them?" Charming blasted spells at both the demons, who took turns diving at the prince, Edith Rose, and Honora.
"Only a sorcerer can defeat a demon," he said, "and I'm just the son of a fairy." "You're more than the son of a fairy," called Philip, rushing to Charming's side. "You're my brother, the son of a queen. I hereby name you my counsel, and the only sorcerer I shall ever trust." "You do me an honor," Charming said, before winding up his wand and thrusting it hard into the night sky. The very air seemed to crack all around them as the empowered ferryman morphed into a stronger, larger version of himself. "I shan't let you down, brother."
And then so many mysteries unraveled, so many secrets hidden in plain sight. Although Honora understood not the politics of kings and sorcerers, she surely understood brothers. Even half-brothers could share the same goals, the same loves, the same dreams. Whatever had just happened between Philip and Charming had unloosened a power she felt must be greater than any potion, any spell, any garden variety hex. Whereas once Charming had been similar in nature to Honora, now he stood at least as tall as the prince, and broad of shoulder. Where he had before worn a modest outfit, his aura now spread about him, a cloak as dark and deep as the night sky, and studded with glowing stars. Honora gasped at the sight of it, so taken was she with her lover just then. To hell with the danger! He is at his best in the face of peril, and I am at my best at his side. The demon sisters shrieked into their feminine forms, materializing on the precipice. "Cinderella!" they called in unison.
"Time to come home to Mommy. The prince is too yummy for you, you dummy."
And they cackled together, dancing sinuously within the swirls of smoke and fine cloth spinning around them in the thin air. If they were trying to ply their demonic charms on Philip, it was not working. He drew Edith Rose tightly against his chest and shielded her face for a moment, but he could not prevent her from pulling away to taunt the sisters with her triumph.
"Get thee away from my man, you Satanistas! He's mine already!"
"Ah, the kitchen maid. She's a shade underpaid, but she'll soon be laid in the shade with a spade,"
they taunted, dancing closer, baring their fangs and showing their evil claws. An inky line of vining tattoos covered their skins, twisting over their supple breasts and winding around each of their bellies as they shook their hips like possessed Bedouins, like succubi, temptresses of the night. Edith Rose shrunk from their evil advance, and that was more than Honora could stand. "Keep away from her!" she yelled, rushing to grab one of the sisters by her shoulders. She failed to make contact, slipping through the vapor of the demon and falling to the ground just short of the turret's edge.
"Cinderella, Cinderella, had a prince but lost her fella. Took up with Rumpelstiltskin's son because his cock is much more fun."
Honora wanted to crush these demons and return to her father's bedside, to drive off the old witch-mother and heal her father's frail body. She gritted her teeth and smirked at the devil's antics, unsure what to do next. "You won't win, you know," Charming said, stepping forward to confront the girls. "You thrive on malice, on envy, on want. You'll find none of that here. All of our yearning has been sated. Ugly sisters."
"Yearning, burning, Charming is learning. Too bad that things are turning."
"Turning for the worse, young man." The deep, smoky voice boomed out of a cloud at the edge of the tower. It was the witch-mother, rising now on the outside of the castle, her voice dripping with malice.
"I knew your father, the wizard, must have been deposed when the strength of the protection spells against my husband cut in half. How dare you cock-block me!"
She stepped off the purple roiling cloud and strode onto the landing as if she owned the castle keep.
"I came just as soon as I'd realized I'd need to be present when Prince Philip selected which of my daughters would be his new bride."
"I won't let you harm a hair on Princess Edith Rose's head," Charming said in his sing-song magical voice. "She as good and kind as you are worthless." He stepped between the prince and his new bride-to-be and the witch. The witch-mother laughed.
"Oh, but I cannot let the kitchen wench go. Good help is so hard to find."
She raised her hands to strike what Honora could only assume was meant to be deadly magic at the little ferryman. Anything but that. Honora didn't have time to think about what she was doing. Was she throwing herself between a witch and a ferryman turned sorcerer? Yes. Was it stupid? Probably. But so was the prospect of life without Charming. "My love, I'm sorry. My love." She felt the spells hit her from both sides, just as when Charming and his father had cast their magic at her. Two different sensations enveloped each side of her body. This time, both were hot. One
was hot with the passion of love, the other burned like the blazes of hell. She could hear her skin and hair sizzling on both sides, could feel her hair catch, could smell the unsavory aroma of burning human flesh. My flesh! Philip and Edith Rose were trying to dash down the steps, while the demons chased in pursuit, taunting them. "Water! Fire on the tower! Water!" Philip called, and then she heard bells ringing from the bell tower as the castle guard made the bucket-passing chain. The queer magic must be lifted. How nice. She was almost falling down the slippery slide of faint again, when Charming stooped before her. "Stand, my love. There is nothing this witch can do to hurt you." She sought to battle a bantam, and found herself at odds with a sorcerer instead.
Honora took a deep breath and tried to sit up, but it did not work. The sky was so dark, and the stars so bright, and she knew that if she just would look past the witch-mother, she could be among them, herself now, just a breath or two away.
"Nothing evil can stand against love, my darling. I know this now," he said, and he scooped her into his arms, his wand tumbling to the ground. A shower of sparks issued forth from the wand, spreading outward like a circle of glowing gold, until the turret itself was gleaming in the night sky. "You are banished from this kingdom," Charming yelled. "On behalf of the king, I declare you an enemy of this land."
"You think you can?"
the witch-mother crooned, but she was unable to finish, for her voice went mute, and her mouth filled with the cyan smoke of one of the sisters. Wider and wider her mouth opened, the facade of her beauty and youth dropping all around her, her body's true age showing now, as Charming placed Honora within the stairwell protectively, and turned to face the hag, a silver dagger sparkling in his hand. The handle was carved of the horn of some wild beast, and he leapt toward the witch, driving the blade into the witch's heart. The purple demon smoke of the other demon swirled down into the witch, fighting to keep her alive. "You have no power here," he whispered. "No power over love." The witch's body slumped to the ground, and Charming raced to Honora. He scooped her into his arms and kissed her forehead tenderly. "Awaken, my love. Awaken, and say goodbye to your tormentor. We are soon to save your father." Chapter 21. Honora vaguely remembered waking, the cool night air from the arrow slits whistling past her face in the violet and cyan. She and Charming had barely made it a flight down the winding stairs before the sounds of retching above them grew unmistakable. Charming dropped her, and she woozily clung to the wall as she saw the demons enter her lover, one through his left nostril, the other through his right. Charming's body shuddered, and Honora felt her blood run cold when an echoing voice issued forth from it.
"The power of a full-fledged wizard at last," the voices said. "Mummy was ever so kind to bring us here, dear sister."
And a tongue flicked forth out of Charming's mouth, forked like a snake.
"Now, do be a good girl and run along."
The demons pried Honora from the wall, and she tumbled, woozy and terrified, into the dark staircase, banging her head and her bones, but failing to stop. I will die. I will die, and Charming will die, and Father will die, and Philip, and Edith Rose. With each tumble, each bang, she grew closer to the brink of unconsciousness. She had seen enough men take head wounds in the duties of pastoral life. There were mules that kicked too hard, men who fell into wells, accidents of such natures, and she knew that if she closed her eyes, she might not ever reopen them. Even as she fell, she thought of this, but she was powerless to fight what was happening. At last, she reached the bottom of the stairs, her body a sack of jelly and her vision clouding. Charming's body skipped down the stairs behind her, lording its power over the puddle that was Honora.
Gaze upon what you'll never fuck again, ignorant bitch.
The double voices of the demon taunted her.
Feel my magic wand. Make a wish,
they said, as Charming's body lifted the robe, and she saw his cock, throbbing and solid as a scepter. Honora tried to move, but it was quite impossible. The light seemed to dim in the sconces on the landing as the demons lowered Charming's body to her face.
Make a wish,
the sisters taunted again.
Give us a kiss for luck.
Honora tried to reach for her lover, and the demons laughed, flicking the evil tongue with glee as her arms twitched and refused to obey. I wish for you to go back to hell, Honora whispered. And then the real magic happened, dear reader. I remind you at this point that although Charming had never told Honora how many wishes he would grant her, Honora had only ever assumed it would be one. One wish she was saving for the life of her father, and although she never had a daughter love her father more, in this moment it was sacrifice, pure and simple, that she committed, not just for the life of her lover, but for the safety of the king and kingdom, of all her loved ones, of the life she'd always known. The demon's shock played out on Charming's rugged face, as light poured forth from every orifice in the ferryman's body. Through his mouth, nose, pupils and ears, then travelling down his arms and legs and shooting light from his fingernails and toenails. Light shone out of everything. So pure was the power of her love in that moment. So great was the power of Honora's sacrifice. And though Honora did well and did right, she did close her eyes, knowing that the last thing she was ever to see was the face of her lover, triumphant as the last vestiges of demonic possession fell away from him, disappearing into the ether forever. Chapter 22. Time passes in a queer way when one is dreaming. Have you ever noticed? One might find oneself with one's departed mother, or with one's lover, or, in turn, one's best friend, the daughter of a cook, turned queen. All of these dream people may say kind and loving things, whispering into one's ear, but when the dream turns to reality, and one hears the voice of one's own beloved father, whispering, "Dear girl, awaken, we miss you so," then one might finally succumb to the wishes of said loved ones, and open one's eyes. It was just so for our Honora, and when she awoke to the sight of her old bedroom filled with sunlight, she feared for a moment that it had all been a dream. There had never been any witch mother, any demon sisters, any ferryman, or any fell magic battle on a castle tower high. "Father," she said, "I I had quite the most absurd dream." The kind gentleman patted her hand and kissed her cheek. When he spoke, it was the musical timbre of his voice that awoke Honora to the truth.
"You are well at last, my darling daughter. Oh, thanks be to God and to the wee ferryman."
Honora sat up. "Father?"
"Yes, my dear."
But what happened? I live? Did I not die? It was not a dream. Or was it?" She swung to her feet to the side of her bed to rise. A crystal decanter sat on the bedside table, crystal as the shoes Charming had made for her. But had he truly? Had it been real at all? Her father steadied her as she rose to her feet.
"Oh, bypass the shoes for once, my darling, and let us repair to the kitchen. You need food, you need drink, and were I a more foolish man, I would try and keep you to your bed to sup. But I know better than that when it comes to you, my girl."
As they shuffled to the kitchen, a million questions filled Honora's mind, although her heart seemed to sing one singular truth in her direction. It was all real, and you did it. You saved your father. But where was Charming? She felt too foolish to ask. Her wish had come true after all. Her father was well and restored. Would Charming have reason to return to her side, now that he was doubtlessly the right hand of the king, his brother? The thoughts filled her mind with angst, and Honora rested her head on the warm kitchen table as her father pulled bread and butter from the cabinets.
"I'll warm some soup for you, dear. We've lost the cook forever, it seems. Queen Mum now, right? But surely we can manage between the two of us until we find someone else to cook."
"Where is everyone else, Father?" Her father did not make eye contact as he sliced the bread and spread it with butter.
"Oh, the servants have all been given their leave until I find new help, unfortunately. So many of them just never came back from the wild place their mistress drove them."
His voice trailed off, and his shoulders slumped for a moment. Then, wiping a tear from his eye, he met his daughter's gaze.
"Honora, can you ever forgive me?"
"Forgive you? Whatever for?"
"For what I did."
Honora took a deep breath. She knew her father was blaming himself for the acts of the witch and the demons she brought into their home. "Daddy, I know you aren't to blame for all that." Her father grimaced.
"Wasn't I, though? Barely had the new snow melted from the grave of your sainted mother when I'd brought another woman into her bed."
His face colored.
"And my daughter, the things I exposed my daughter to, I am ashamed."
"But, Father, she forced you. She made you do her bidding. It was those demons, Father, not you, never you." Her father sighed.
"Oh, that I could truly say that, Honora. In another life, when your mother lived, I never thought I should converse with my daughter about love and lust and seedy truths, but I can't lie to you, not after all you went through to save me. The truth is, I enjoyed it. It might have been the cruelest torture, and I knew that I should stop. But as long as those demons were astride me, I loved the pain of it all. I loved how wrong it was, and for that I am truly ashamed. I should have stopped it sooner. I should have said no. I could have said no. I should have...
Father, stop! This is madness. You wanted love. You sought it. You did no wrong.
She wanted to add, "You are thoroughly disgusting me now." But she thought better of it.
Her father smirked.
"You sound so like your mother," he said. "You know, she came to me in my dreams for quite some time. So kind, always so forgiving. Spoiled me, she did. Ever true in life and ever true in death. You ever wonder, my dear, what is a dream? If I didn't know better, I'd swear it had actually been her, watching over me during my enslavement."
And Nora couldn't stop the tears. "Oh, Father," she said, and then she felt his strong arms around her, cradling her. For the first time since the horrible journey had begun, she let go her grief. She could barely choke out the words through her sobs. I had the same dreams, Father. Oh, Father, it truly was her. It must have been, for she visited me as well, and comforted me." The pair of them cried, and her father rocked her slowly, slowly. She fell into a sort of a trance, the kind of exhausted state brought on by crying, by grief, by the comfort of one's most intimate loved one, and being there, being so loved. The road had been so long to get to this place, and she was ever so weary. "Aye, what was I thinking?" her father finally said, breaking the stillness. "Back to bed with ye. I'll bring you broth and bread, and then you must rest." Chapter 23. Kitchen noises and a clucking like an oversized hen in a state of disquiet awoke our Honora next. "Cookie!" Honora said, and she jumped from her bed and rushed downstairs to the kitchen. The manor was empty, still. It was midday, and normally the kitchens would have been full of workers taking bowls of soup and slices of bread for their lunch in the rear of the house before returning to the fields. Instead, she found a rather well-dressed Cookie pointing out implements for cooking and cleaning as a strange woman with a kind face looked on. "Oh, mistress, you're up," Cookie said, turning to her. "Your father's just gone out for an errand, but it's ever so lovely to see your face, milady." "Oh, Cookie," Honora said, throwing herself into the woman's embrace. "But I shan't call you Cookie again, shall I? What of Edith Rose and the prince?"
"Oh, them," Cookie clucked. "Yep, they're to be married as soon as possible. Coronation was last week. You were tuckered out, of course, but everyone wished you'd have been there. I think they're waiting to make sure you can stand up for them at the altar before they tie the knot. So, you'd better get your rest. His Royal Highness has sent one of his own chefs to tend to you and your pa while you're on the mend, and I was just showing her around a bit."
"Milady has been most helpful," the woman said.
"Milady," Cookie snarked. "That's taking some getting used to."
She laughed, and Honora's heart felt light.
"Don't you dare start calling me that, mistress. I've been your Cookie since birth, and your Cookie I'll always be. Count on that."
Honora's heart was light at the sound of Cookie's happy musical voice. Her father's voice had that music as well. Charming's music. But what of Charming? "Any other news, Cookie?" Honora asked, hopefully. Cookie eyed her knowingly.
"Back to bed with ye, milady. Ye need your rest. I'll have the new cook bring up some victuals directly."
Chapter 24. Pensive and full of angst, Honora lay in her bed, a delicate book of fairy tales open before her. "What is this tribe about fairy godmothers and princes and magical talking animals?" she whispered. "It's all a lot of rot. Real magic doesn't happen like that at all." And she lapsed into sleep, bitter and confused, frustrated and lonely, though she knew in her heart she had gotten exactly what she'd asked for. "Why doesn't it feel like enough, Mother?" she called into the glittering night sky of her dream world. There was no answer. "Mother?" Honora sought her everywhere, running the first length of the walk between Philip's castle watchtowers, then dashing down the front steps where she had once lost a shoe to the prince before being swallowed by an enormous pumpkin. "Hogwash and mayhem," she said. "Mother, where are you?" She ran down the cobblestone lane, and all the houses and cottages she passed on the way were dark. The shops were dark as well. No one was about, and even the cock refused to crow. The night was as still as death itself, urging Honora onward. Eventually, she reached her home. As it was in waking life, the manor was airily empty. Honora knew this as truth, so she bypassed the building completely and made a line for her mother's final resting place. "Mother!" she called. For once, nothing chased her. The waking nightmare of the demon sisters was over, the confusing rush of emotions for Charming, a distant truth, bringing neither delight nor sadness. As she came to a stop over the grave of her mother, her only companion was the truth. "You can't come to me, Mother, because you've gone on. That's it, isn't it?" Honora listened for an answer, but she knew it would not come. "I suppose it's time I faced some truths on my own." She understood that she was speaking only to herself now. No dream mother was going to come to her unless she imagined it so. And, as much as she had needed to imagine it in days past, she didn't require it now. Not as much as she required this solitary peace, this acceptance of what was. She spoke at length with her mother at the grave, reviewing the events of the past months and accepting them. "This is what happened, Mother, and whatever may come, I shall face it as a woman now. I shall endure, Mother. One day I shall see you again in heaven." She felt the truth sink into her, and, though she was cold and alone in the darkness atop her mother's grave, she did not fear, and she did not weep. Still, she did not feel complete. "Maybe I never will feel complete, Mother. I'll live with it, if that's how it's meant to be." She remembered her mother's voice. "You're a good girl, Honora." Memory would have to suffice. She turned away from her mother's grave and entered the house. As she ascended the stairs to her room, she saw, instead of her own open door, the open door of Charming's trove, the golden green light of all his worldly possessions gleaming out before her. She felt the thrill of anticipation as well as the dread of uncertainty. Her feet couldn't move her fast enough up the stairs, and yet she felt as though she would die when she saw his face. He was as she remembered him at their last meeting, taller in stature and broader of shoulder than when he had been her lover. Here sat the sorcerer of the king. "Charming," she said. He did not react. "Charming!" she shouted, the urgency rising in her now. He turned his head from one side to the other, as if he might have heard someone call his name in another room, but he did not make eye contact. Honora rushed to him, shaking him by the shoulders and grasping him above the knee, pushing him, shoving him as hard as she could in her dream state. "Charming! I love you! Charming! Charming!" He was as solid and immovable as an oaken stump, and her frustration grew too great. And then she awoke. Something told her to check outside her window. The night was dark and the stars were hidden, but through a hole in the clouds the moon shone down upon her mother's grave. The stone, flat to the ground and engraved with the name of her sainted mother, shone white in the darkness. Something lay atop it, something round and dark. Whatever could this be? Wrapping herself in a dressing gown and taking a sword from the wall in her father's study, Honora strode out of the manor. Once upon a time she would have been scared, or she would have woken her father for help. But that was before, when she was just a girl in a young woman's body. What could frighten her now? Atop her mother's grave lay a circlet of roses and a bird's nest within. She lifted the small wreath with the sword and let it fall to her wrist, raising the blade to the sky. Strange, but a fitting tribute nonetheless, probably left by a local peasant. The sword still, she cried into the darkness. "If the admirer of my mother is still nearby, please, show yourself. I wish to thank you for this tribute. Do not be afraid." And then she saw movement in the copse of trees beyond her mother's grave. Shifting the sword as she took a defensive stance, she waited. Maybe I shouldn't have called out like that. Maybe I should have just returned to bed. A hooded figure strode toward her in the darkness, the deep midnight hue of his velvet cloak disguising him perfectly in the starless night. As he neared the shaft of moonlight, he lowered the hood of his cloak, revealing wavy blonde hair beneath. "Honora," he said. Honora dropped the sword. "Charming!" And without a thought, without a care, she flung herself into his arms, kissing his face and running her fingers greedily through his hair. Tears streamed down her face. "Oh, Charming! Charming! At last I can be whole, for you have returned to me." Charming gently peeled himself away from her and dropped to one knee, bowing his head. "Forgive me, my lady. I have done you wrong, and must seek your forgiveness. Strike me with your sword if you must, but do forgive me." Honora was stunned. "What are you saying? What does this mean? She could scarcely decode his intentions. I could never strike you, my love. What evil could you have done? Charming stared up at her earnestly with his green eyes.
My beautiful lady, I regret most deeply the violations I have foisted upon your body at a time when you were exceptionally vulnerable. You were the finest virgin in the land, and I had you for my own, while I planned to sell you to the future king. I used you as a pawn for power and glory, and you gave me your entire heart. I am ashamed, milady. I was unworthy of you.
He paused, lowering his face in shame. Honora thought she saw tears fall from his face, glistening in the moonlight. He sighed and looked up at her again, with watery eyes.
The fact that I fell in love with you does not redeem what my intentions were from the beginning. Now that I love you so, I would kill any man who looked at you with the kind of lust I plied at your fairest form. I am a wretch, a beast.
Honora dropped to her knees before him. Don't say that, she said, reaching for him, but he looked away. Even in the darkness she could see how he blushed in shame, and she caressed his cheek, though his jaw tightened at her touch. "Oh, charming," she said, "can't you see? Each of us only ever did what we thought we must. And we found love in the midst of it was the real magic, my dearest. Can you not forgive us each our past, and move forward at my side?" Charming's tears gleamed golden in the moonlight, dripping down his cheek and onto her finger. Where they lingered, Honora reached and drew a circle around her fourth finger on her left hand. "Make this whole, my love. Turn it into gold. I know you can," she whispered. You would be my bride?" he asked huskily. She could hear so many things in his voice. The lust of the man who'd ravaged her night after night, the hope of the boy heartbroken over the loss of his own mother, the wisdom of the king's right hand, driven by honor to make things right with the only woman he'd ever truly loved. She heard it all. She saw it all wrapped up in the same little ferryman who blossomed before her eyes, the powerful sorcerer, the magic man, her only true love. "I was made for you, charming," she replied, through tears of her own. The golden band grew a crystal blossom atop it, as Honora whispered her reply. "As you wish, my love. As you wish." And they kissed, passionately and lovingly. And they lived, charmingly, ever after. This has been As You Wish, a Cinderella story and erotic romance, written by A. Violet End, narrated by Marasha Black. Copyright 2013 by A. Violet End. Production copyright 2013 by A. Violet End.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.